All right. Good evening. This is the Guilford, Connecticut Board of Education. Tonight is Monday, January 29th. Tonight we're holding a special meeting to allow us some time to talk about the budget. We did have two public forums last Monday and Tuesday evenings in which we received input from the public on a number of different items important to them. Likewise, we have received a number of email communications from folks in Guilford, like sharing input, asking for clarification questions. We are expecting next Monday, February 5th, to be voting on a proposed budget to forward to the Board of Finance. So this is an opportunity tonight for the board to discuss further some of the items in the budget, to ask questions if we have them. Because one of the foci of our discussions and the public comment has been athletics, we're going to talk in some depth about athletics tonight and have a presentation that Dr. Freeman is going to share. Mr. Jake Jarvis, our athletic director, is with us tonight, as is Ms. Julia Chaff, principal of Guilford High School. So we're prepared to have just the opportunity to go through a fair amount of the budget tonight and help prepare us for the vote next Monday. I think we're going to start with the athletic presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. We are happy to share this presentation with you. I do want to note that this slide deck is a little out of the ordinary for the slide presentations that I usually share. There are a lot of tables and charts in this slide deck. And so rather than try to read this to you, we want to present the information and maybe point out some items of note on the tables, but not try to narrate this entire slide deck as we go through it. I know that as board members, you received an electronic copy earlier today. You have a paper copy in front of you that should make it easier to follow along. And if it is not already available on our website, this presentation will be available on our website by tomorrow morning for the entire viewing public as well. This slide presentation has been put together in at least 3 different offices. Linda did a lot of work with her staff and her office. Jake spent time in his office with his staff, and I spent a little bit of time in my office working on it. Julia may have edited and made contributions as well. So there's a lot of information, and there'll be a number of us commenting on this as we move through these slides. It is an invitation to conversation and deliberation. So there's a slide at the end that asks for questions, but as always, please interrupt us and engage with us as we go through. Athletics, co-curriculars in general are an important part of what we do here in the Guilford High School and in the Guilford Public Schools. We see athletics not just as a place to dominate our neighbors and rivals, but also to give students an opportunity to learn about sportsmanship, to learn about teamwork, and develop character as they participate in sports. I have shared with the board and the community more times than I can count that I am the father of 4 sons who were all 3-season high school athletes. More than a couple of them went on to be college athletes. And sports is full of highs and lows. Teenagers have some of their very best days and some of their lowest lows on competitive fields and courts. It is an important part of what we do, and many of us remember our high school athletic experiences perhaps more vividly than we remember some classroom experiences. In Guilford High School, we have a full athletic offering. With the return of cheer this year, I believe we are over 30 athletic offerings in a school that I think is floating right around 1,000 students, and they have dipped below 1,000 students. This is
Slightly above.
This is a significant offering. It is a significant palette of choices for a school of our size. It's an impressive palette of opportunities for a school of our size. And at times that brings its own challenges. sports are competing with each other to fill their rosters, and students can only participate in 3 seasons. So again, it's both a highlight and at times a scheduling challenge for us. Jake, I don't know if you want to touch on this one a little bit, but the participation rate is something to be proud of as well.
Yes, we have about 600 kids that are individualized, 1,000 kids, a little 1,000 kids that get involved in athletics here at the high school. We have people that play multiple seasons, so that's where you get the $8.99 from. If you play football, then you run, and then you do track in the spring. That's where we count you twice. But about 600 individualized athletes that participate themselves.
Jake, I also thought that it made sense for you to speak to the next couple of slides about both team and individual accomplishments. What our students produce through athletics is impressive.
Last year we had 7 state championships, 2 state runner-ups, 1 conference champion, 2 conference runner-ups, division champion, 7. So our overall varsity record, not counting the sub-varsities, is 334 wins, 219 losses, 11 ties, which is a 60% winning total.
That's last year specifically.
Yeah,
That's not our historic.
No, that's not historic. It changes every year as it's variable in what we win and the accomplishments of our athletes, but they do a really good job. You can see on the next slide the individual accomplishments. We're very proud, and they work really hard, and they represent the schools and the community extremely well, and they're recognized around the state for all what that they do, and that we're very proud of them. So I mean, the slide can speak for itself of their individual accomplishments.
We also want to take just a little bit of time to note that we do not have a high school athlete on our property who is playing on or competing on any varsity surface that is older than 2015. This is a commitment that this town has made, and the board knows, but maybe the town, the viewing public doesn't recognize that these investments stand separate to but parallel to our operating budgets. The investments that this community put into this new high school, anybody in town who remembers the building committee meetings and the time and the planning and the effort that went into the athletic facilities associated with this building. So when this building opened, we inherited, or we took ownership of a new upper grass field, of a new turf field, a complete new gym, a full auxiliary gym, new baseball field, new softball field. We failed to mention the wrestling space on here. And in the years since the ribbon cutting on this new building, the upper field was actually a year or two behind the opening of the building here. But we renovated the turf stadium field, the track surrounding the turf stadium field, the lighting and the press box associated with that field, and then just this past summer renovated the tennis courts as well. And you see here the stadium turf field. This was before the track was completed. Then the new stadium track, our main gymnasium, and a little breakout of the main gymnasium after the rebranding, the baseball diamond, the upper turf field, the tennis courts that were completed this past summer, and then the softball diamond as well. We're just enormously proud of the facilities that we have on site and that we provide to our students. And it's worth noting that while those facilities target our varsity athletes during the school day and during our school seasons, they also provide opportunities for the community well beyond that. So particularly those two turf fields and the way that they support youth lacrosse, youth soccer, youth football, and any other opportunity in town are important to note as well. Additionally, with the change of the high school mascot, we want to point out that we replaced high school uniforms as we rebranded. We went through a 2 to 3 year process of reuniforming all of our high school athletes as well. And so you see here the dates associated with how we reuniformed all of our students. But we're here tonight for a budget meeting. And so beyond just patting ourselves on the back for the program that we offer, we do want to spend some time tonight making sure that we talk about how we fund these programs and specifically dive into a lot of tables and charts about where those dollars go. It is important to note that the athletic programs in Guilford High School, Guilford Public Schools, draw financial support from 3 separate and distinct places. One, and most importantly, is from the Guilford Public Schools budget. And so for the most part, our athletic program is funded through our annual operating budget, and particularly the operating budget. And we've been working over the last few years with teams like swim and hockey to be able to say that the Guilford Board of Ed operating budget pays for coaches' salaries, all supplies and equipment, all transportation costs, all officials' costs, and facilities costs. We're working to move in that direction, and we've been doing so over the last several years. You don't see facilities listed here because we have not yet reached a point where we can say that our budget is paying for all facilities costs. Right now, particularly for swimming and hockey, we still have parents through booster clubs offsetting those costs to a certain degree. We then draw money through student activity accounts. Student activity accounts are predominantly generate revenue through gate receipts. We sell annual passes and we sell tickets at many of our home events. And that revenue is important to offsetting the cost that impacts the budget. And then finally, as I just mentioned, we receive money from booster organizations. Those are essentially independent organizations that have formed around individual sports. Those parents raise money in a variety of creative ways to differing degrees, and they contribute those dollars to us. In some places, those dollars have traditionally paid for facilities costs. In other places, they have paid for coaching positions over and above what the board budget has provided or does provide. And at times they provide additional nice to haves, things like spirit wear or banquets or other benefits that are provided to the students that are nice to have, but aren't necessarily required to be part of the sport. And so let's dig into some of those tables and charts and look at the expenditures. So in a number of these next slides, we could not fit it all together, so we have broken it out by season. But here you see the expenditures for last year, 22-23, and broken out by fall sport. You see what the operating budget has entered into this under coaches and assistant coaches, officials costs, facility fees, transportation, equipment, and then to the far right, you can see the impact of the booster clubs. You see field hockey there, you see football there, you see the girls swim team there. And then you see the total expenditure by sport. It is important to note here, and it's going to be important as we look at lots of these tables, comparing different sports is like comparing apples and carburetors. If we own a facility, it is completely different than if we have to rent a facility for the students to participate in a sport. We're going to show you a little later on a similar slide to this, but broken out per student, per sport. It is important that we know that we're not comparing, and Jake and Julia and I are not sitting here tonight saying that we should level spending per athlete and that we should spend $500 per every athlete regardless of the sport. That's simply not how it works. We are looking to provide those 30 opportunities to our students. And some of them carry more cost than others because they're newer, because fewer students participate, because we need to rent a facility, because there are increased coaching costs. They're just very different. And it's important to make that note. And you see that on this slide, where one sport comes in at $11,000 per season and another one comes in at $43,000. When you move to the winter sports, you will see here under the booster column how hockey boosters have been providing a significantly larger contribution. You'll also notice on this slide 2 teams that are designated as co-op teams. Girls hockey is a co-op where we are the host community and we invite other students from schools that don't have girls hockey teams to participate with us. Jake, do you know off the top of your head what other towns participate in our hockey program?
East Haven, Cognachaw, and North Branford has in the past, but this year they do not have a girl.
And then in boys swimming, that is a situation where we do not host the team, but our boys swimmers have an opportunity to participate on a swim team that is currently hosted out of North Haven High School. And it's not just our two schools, there are some other.
East Haven, North Branford.
Branford.
Brentford.
No, Branford is with hand.
And so in each of those situations, we participate in a collaborative or a co-op opportunity, one where we're the host school and we invite others to participate with, and one where we are participating in a school that hosts us. In the past, we have also had situations where we have teams of one. And the most recent example of that would be gymnastics. We do not have a gymnastics team, but we had a very talented student who wanted to participate. That student was allowed to participate with another neighboring school, practiced with the school, competed with the school, but competed under a Guilford banner while she trained with and traveled with another school. And then here are the spring sports. Again, you'll notice how programs like swim and hockey and golf have facility fees because we don't own a golf course or a pool or an ice rink. Yeah, absolutely, please.
It's a little bit in the weeds. The winter sports page, hockey boys paid by the Booster Club, that was, that 19,000 plus is for boys hockey, not split between boys and girls.
No, that's what the Booster Club paid. So
But is that for the
so
both
the Board
teams?
of Ed last year paid $1,500 for ice time. I'm
Right.
Saying that the total cost of the ice time was $34,000.
Okay.
So the Booster Club paid $19,000.
But it didn't
For the
just go
boys
to the
only, not
boys.
The boys only.
Oh, because
With
the girls are
With the girl, the co-op, we
Gotcha.
broke down per pupil cost and then sent out to the other schools.
Gotcha.
And they paid
That
us,
makes
so
sense.
we paid the 15,000 from the Board of Ed
Right.
budget.
And
they
the other
collected
was
money
paid
from
by the
them,
rest.
So the Booster Club did not have to pay that.
Okay, thank you.
North Haven pays for the girls team, and then at the end of the year, sort of invoices our per student cost associated with those fees. We do the same.
Makes
Sorry.
sense.
For the boys team,
Yes,
no.
yep.
Yep.
So that's why the girls' hockey looks so high. We're not showing that offset of the co-op participation in this chart.
You're gonna see it, sorry, this is raw cost.
That's what I'm just asking,
Yes,
like, how
yeah,
much
I
of
don't
that
think-
is covered by co-op participants?
I don't think that this chart shows the offset of what we bill the co-op
Right, 'cause
participants.
otherwise
I
it
think,
looks-
yes.
Like they're carrying a big
And is that accurate?
cost.
Yes. Thank you for noticing. Yes.
Can I ask, and, I'm sorry, this also doesn't account for like what parents wind up having to pay, right? So where we've got paid by Booster Club, there's kind of an additional column that we don't see that would be like parents' fees, like we pay, I don't know, $50 to play field hockey every year. That's not included
That
in
goes-
this.
That, so
number, right?
your $50 you
That-
pay for field hockey has nothing to do with them actually playing field. hockey.
We don't level any fees.
So that's not included in the Booster Club though, right? So like,
It
is,
would be,
is
yes.
parents kind of cost to play?
No.
We've heard people
There's
talk
no,
about.
there's no cost to play. This is so if you pay $50 to the Booster Club, it doesn't cost you to play field hockey. The only
Or-
teams that have paid like to play are
Or like.
ice hockey,
Yeah,
crew.
Yeah.
Those sports, but
And those
like a
are-
field hockey, so if you're charging $50, it's not to play.
but is that going in the Booster Club column or is that in some other column that's not identified on this
That's not
spreadsheet?
under the Board of Ed.
Okay,
So
Right.
the booster clubs take in money as independent organizations. Some of that they funnel back to us in the form of coaches or a facilities fee.
Mhm.
Some of it, the boosters hold on to, and then they expend on the athletes, but they expend it independently. Linda, I'm gonna be asking you to check everything I say here. So if the booster clubs take in money from parents, use it to purchase spirit wear and deliver that spirit wear to the students directly, it's not showing on this chart.
Got it.
Every month where you accept a donation from a booster club to pay for a coach or to buy equipment that becomes our belonging, then that should be showing on this chart here that you see in front of you.
So boys ice hockey is for the ice
Am
time.
I okay on that?
And baseball on the next page is for an assistant coach. Boys lacrosse is for 2 assistant coaches, so you have that 6,000. So
Got it.
all that money has been paid to us to cover coaches. But it's nothing to do with, we provide the balls, we provide the uniforms. we provide
Right,
the
okay,
officials.
For
So-
some of the programs, one of the biggest expenses is the banquet. And so money goes to
Okay.
the boosters host and pay for the banquet, and that money never passes.
So
through
that
the
money's
school.
not on here at all. So we might pay whatever we pay if we are participating in a booster club payment. So we're paying to the booster club. Portions of that are allocated here. Other portions are not on this at all. Got it. Okay.
Correct. And then Jake and Julia and John and I, that's fun. Jake, Julie, John and I, we met with representatives from the booster clubs a few weeks ago because there's a language problem that we're trying to get ahead of. And again, I say this all the time, athletics in Guilford evolved kind of naturally, kind of like a rainforest. And everybody evolved at different rates and talks about things differently. Some of the booster clubs, to your point, some of the booster clubs position themselves and ask for contributions in a way that makes it sound required, that it's dues or it's a fee. And for some programs like hockey, the reality is it has been a necessity. If the boosters didn't raise enough money to offset the ice time,
There's no way.
we couldn't have
Yeah.
had a team otherwise.
Mhm.
But a lot of the boosters position that as a requirement. To be on the field hockey team, you have to pay $50. Technically and correctly, nobody has to pay to participate in any of our publicly offered programs. And a few years ago, we were sending out letters reminding parents of that. This year, rather than working around and outside the booster clubs, we chose to have this meeting, and we're trying to clean up the language from the get-go so that boosters can raise money and can do it through donations, contributions, fundraising activities. But all those activities are voluntary. And we didn't want to demand and ask the clubs to do that until we were able to say, we're paying for most of the necessities. Now we need you to fall in line with the language structure
Okay.
and ask people for contributions, not levy fees of the people who want to play the sports.
I hear you. I appreciate that information, but it's definitely not reflecting the true cost of what the sport costs. So hockey would not be able to exist because Guilford provides it, because we don't. So they wouldn't be able to play hockey. You certainly wouldn't be able to row crew. And so the explanation you just gave is misleading, possibly, not deliberately. But the true cost of actually having to play these sports and participate in these sports is a whole different value than, or cost than what you're reporting here for many of the sports.
We're getting closer. So crew is always going to be an exception, and crew is structured differently. Crew is both a club at the town level and competes under our
It's by
banner.
necessity, because we
Right.
don't fund it.
Hockey and swimming and golf are getting much closer to being accurate, right? We're getting closer to being able to say, I think the numbers I heard is that hockey parents were paying $2,200 a year not long ago, and we should be down to about $600 next year. That could be brought in through the fundraising. If this budget passes and includes this $80,000 increase roughly in athletics, of which I think an additional 10,000 is full-time and 75,000 is, those aren't increases. If we make this investment in pool and ice time this year, as we said we were going to do last year, and then cut it in half, we're getting there. We're getting closer to being able to say that we fund the things that this lists. That's never going to be a true cost for hockey, because hockey families buy all of their own gear and equipment, and that doesn't happen in all sports. That, again, and I don't totally understand it, but traditionally schools provided the equipment for football and basketball and baseball. Other sports like hockey and lacrosse, players bought their own equipment. I think part of that is because the equipment is so individual and many of our students don't just play for our team, they also play for travel teams. If it was our equipment, we wouldn't be able to lend it out. They wouldn't be able to use it off season. But we'll never be able to say that hockey is not an expensive sport for a family to get into, even if we say we're covering all of the coaching, all of the officials, all the facilities, all the transportation. Equipment doesn't mean individual equipment. Students are still buying their own pads, their own sticks, their own helmets, that sort of thing. I think we're getting closer, Noel, to being able to say it is an honest accounting. Although I don't expect the booster clubs to go out of business. I expect the booster clubs to continue raising money. And I think to an email that you guys received at the end of last week, I think there's probably always going to be a different level of service expectation. We feel that we are staffing the lacrosse clubs at the appropriate coaching level to staff the lacrosse clubs. The boosters raise money and provide for 2 more coaching positions.
For the boys.
Our goal is not to do everything that we're currently doing in the operational budget. It's to do what we consider to be the responsible level of investment. And then we're thrilled to have a community that volunteers and raises money and then allows us to do all the more. Remember, our 4 elementary school playgrounds have been paid for with funds raised through contributions and volunteerism, not through our budget.
Can I ask, sorry.
No, well, is there a way to get to that transparent level of transparency where we could understand as a town just what is required to fully fund, right? We will consistently have these positions that are paid for by boosters. But it would be nice from a budget standpoint to be able to know if we were to go all in on this, not saying we would,
Right.
but for full transparency, how do we get there? Because we often have the parents or the boosters coming to us and saying, we need additional funding for coach, assistant coach, whatever it might be. We'd like to be able to maybe see that whole picture to be able to understand what that is. I hear what you're saying about boosters needing to be relevant and needing to
Right.
fundraise, but it would be nice to have an all-in number to see what it was.
I worry about that to some degree, and I'll invite Jake and Julia to chime in because the boosters and the teams are so different and individual at this time. Some booster clubs raise a significant amount of money around really elaborate banquets.
Mhm.
Other teams may just have an ice cream truck on the last day of practice. And so to do that, we would either have to control the boosters and say every club has a hooded sweatshirt and this kind of banquet, and,
Right.
or beyond that, we'd at least have to start asking them for a full accounting of all of their, and right now we don't. The boosters are so separate and apart from us. I mean, maybe not the best analogy, but kind of like a pack, right?
Yeah.
We run the program. They run money separate and apart to an earlier point, some of which we don't track or follow. And so we would either have to require a level of accounting from them and then follow that level of accounting, or we would have to standardize the offering. And some of the booster clubs have been around for decades. Others are relatively new. Some are, right, and it's just dramatically different. And I'd invite both of you and Linda to tell me if I got that right or wrong.
I'm confused on the question. I'm sorry.
So how do we count every dollar that gets expended on our student athletes?
So if you take field
Yeah.
hockey and you eliminate the booster club.
Yep.
You're still gonna have a field hockey team. You still have 3 teams. They'll have everything they need to play. They won't have a banquet. They won't have a pink shirt.
What about crew?
I'm just.
Crew is
I'm
always
using-
an exception.
No, I'm using-
Hold on.
I'm using that
Please,
point.
I
I'm
asked the
using,
question. I'd like you to just answer the question and don't interrupt me. Thank you. What about crew? Crew needs 40-something thousand dollars from the boosters. You can't just say, we'll eliminate the boosters. That's impossible.
I just-
Hockey, we can't eliminate the boosters. It's a non-reality. So we have, we're asking for a full accounting of what it would cost to fully fund sports. I'm sure that if we ask the boosters, please send us your cost, they would send it to us. We just need the information to make decisions. And we haven't for 2 years gotten the information. We would like it, please.
No,
We want to make it.
I don't think Jake was suggesting that we eliminate the boosters. I think he was trying
I
to
know.
illustrate. Yeah, okay.
I also think though that, I mean, I do think there's some nuance that we really have to pay attention to. as the parent of a fencing athlete here, the fencing team provides the equipment.
Mhm.
Most of the students, including my own, bought their own for a couple of reasons, some of which a little bit your budget.
Yeah.
Brendan competed at a number of state, regional, and national competitions, not only during the school year, but over the summer. We were lucky to be able to afford the equipment, so he was able to have the most recent equipment. That was not required for him to be on the fencing team. And so I think there are probably also examples like that
Sure, there's no doubt.
that are
I agree with
really
that, yeah.
complicate this
Yeah.
and don't make it as crystal clear.
And Crew exists in two realities. Crew is both a club that exists at the town level, which charges a fee to participate, and is a quasi varsity sport. Hockey is a little bit different. It is only a varsity sport that had a booster club that from the beginning was told, if you don't raise enough money to pay for the ice, the team's going to go away. So while it felt the same, and if you had both a rower and a hockey player, you were spending a lot of money, they were structured very
But
differently.
the structure can't be used as an excuse for the fact that the school system is offering it as a sport to between 50 and 70 boys and girls. At a cost of $400 to $700 a year per parent. Are we using the notion that it's a club sport simply as a way of avoiding the full cost? And if the parents couldn't pay for it any longer, would we drop the sport for 50, 60 kids? Or would we say, in order to compete in rowing, we gotta pick up the cost?
How much it'll cost.
So
And I hear it all the time from the rowing parents, so that's why I want to know.
I don't think we're using it as an excuse, but I think it is a reality. Many public high school crew teams fall under the same structure. And it's a way for a public school to offer a really expensive sport.
Eight out of 10 schools we compete with fully pay all the costs for 2 seasons. The data are there. We've seen the data. So the fact is, we're competing against other schools that are 4 or 5 times more funded, and they're treated as a two season sport. So rather than a kid playing football and baseball, these kids are practicing in large part because the nature of rowing is there's relatively little water time in the spring. So the only way you can get enough ice time, melted ice time, is to do it over 2 terms. So if we're gonna take that sport seriously in the future, then we have to understand that it's the second largest sport we have in terms of number of participants. 50 to 70 kids.
That's what ranges. You go from 50 something to 90 something. It ranges all.
And we don't buy any of the equipment. One shell can go between 20 and 60,000. Parents are spending a fortune. Now, if we wanted to say, we can't afford one, we're just out of the business of that. Or know in advance that for anybody who wants to row, there's a cost. And well, I'm getting from parents is this confusion. How come we're not getting the support? And so I think we owe them some answers or some money, one of the two.
Well, and go ahead. Sorry.
So I'm looking at this and then there's not many sports that are not CIAC. Why aren't they CIAC? Like fencing just did a phenomenal job. I believe they were champs or something, but they're not.
Almost every year for the past several
So
decades.
why aren't they CIAC and more funded? You know what I mean? Like, what's the qualifications for that?
Well, the
I think
CIAC
that's a
designation
different-
doesn't impact the funding.
That's a different, yeah.
Okay.
Why are some sports not CIAC?
CIAC will only, if I get this correct, will only sponsor sport if it's 181 high schools.
Yeah, I don't think fencing and.
There has to be a
Fencing is-
certain amount of those
No.
schools that have.
It isn't popular.
There have to be a certain amount of those schools that have the sport, and then they will make it a CIAC.
Yeah.
sport.
But it in no way, it in
Unrelated.
no way impacts our funding.
It's unrelated.
So I think it's important to add another piece to the historical conversation. As booster and volunteer support for the clubs, the teams has become sort of significant and confusing in Guilford. We have also periodically cycled back to conversations about pay for play. So there are other high schools where any athlete who wants to participate is charged a flat fee. And it would usually be $250 or $300 per season per sport, with a cap for individuals and a cap for families. We have talked as a school system and as a board about never wanting to move towards the pay for play.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter what sport you participate in. It doesn't matter if you run cross country or if you play ice hockey or if you row. Every athlete pays that flat fee, and then that flat fee comes in and offsets the town's expenses. We have always embraced the generosity of the community, but that happens in fits and starts and sporadically and different. And again, it goes to both the beauty and the challenge of the way that we do things in Guilford. We don't charge everybody to participate. And if you want to try a sport this year, you can come out and try. But then those more challenging sports have built these traditions of parental contribution. And again, we've been working as a board to chip away at that and to bring that expense down. Tonight's conversation is an effort to bring some transparency to that conversation, but both of those are easier said than done. It is hard to explain this in a way that is clear and easy, and mostly difficult to explain it in a way that is consistent, because it has evolved. So I mean, it's grown up in fits and spurts, and we've tried to hold on to the character that the teams came forward. And I think the best, most recent example of that are the swim teams. So a number of years ago, a number of parents approached the high school and Jake and myself and said, listen, we'd love to have a swim team, and it won't cost you guys a dime. We don't want you to invest anything. We just want you to let us swim, and we'll raise the money, and we want to swim for our school. And we started it that way. And then we started investing money into the programs, and then the girls team became a fully standalone team. And I think lacrosse historically approached the school district that way. I have a sense that that's how crew came on board. It was far before my time. And so each of these programs has sort of grown up with the idea that we're just going to do it from a volunteer perspective. And again, that's great on the one hand. It's really difficult and challenging on the other hand. And we watch each of those sports, some faster than others, graduate into being fully funded. Hockey is on a 30-year growth plan to try to finally reach full funding. Swimming looks like they've achieved it in 6 or 7 years. Every one of them is different. And to some degree, it's the size of the ask, I think.
Yeah.
So back to answer your question.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Thank you, because I do have a follow-up.
Yeah, you can take field hockey, Booster Club away, you can still have it.
Yeah.
You can't do that for hockey or crew. You have to have the funding for the Booster Club, or you will not be able to have it.
And so that's what I'm getting at, right? Of a $70+ million budget, there's $44,000 by these line items that I can calculate here that are paid for by boosters. And what I'm trying to get at is, of that number, what's the nice to have and what's the need to have? And so because it will help us be able to draft future budgets.
Paid by the boosters. Well, that swimming was pool rental, which we now cover. This is last year.
This is last year. Right?
Ice hockey, boys ice hockey is must have, because that was the extra cost for the ice time. Everything else is an extra coach that they want. So it's not.
Ultimately, what I'm getting at is we have a $70+ million budget, and we're talking about $44,000.
Yep.
And that is the difference between having some coaches, having pool time, having need to haves, as opposed to the events, the after season events and T-shirts and all that kind of stuff.
And I think there will always be some debate about what we
Like the
identify
market,
as a
right.
necessary,
Right.
and what we identify as a nice to have. That line will move. I'm sorry, Julie.
No, I just wanted to also offer that if we funded, let's say we funded additional coaches for particular sports, my prediction would be then that other sports representatives would come forward and say, well, you're funding 4 coaches for this team.
Right.
We also need 4 coaches, or right. And so I think that is part of what I hear the struggle in terms of the explanation is coming from this place of, we know we're offering a set number of coaches for each of the teams that we're offering as an opportunity for our athletes. It's a little bit of a tricky question to answer in terms of, well, if we start funding additional coaches for particular teams, then are we not opening ourselves up to, why aren't you offering additional coaches for all of the teams? And then do you limit it by number of participants? That's what happened with our cheerleading team. We had a sharp decline very rapidly when I was here as an assistant principal in cheerleading participation, and a big jump all of a sudden in dance team participation. And then it fell out of the budget as a result, because we weren't going to be able to continue to fund a team of literally one cheerleader at one point. We had one cheerleader. And so fast forward a number of years, we now have a new interest in cheerleading again, which I think is wonderful. And I'm glad that we're working it back into the budget. But I think it's not that we're trying to be cagey in the answers. I think that, like with course offerings, as interest wanes and waxes, that we have had to be adaptable in terms of how the funding has gone.
Yeah, it's like the swim team thing, like there's just more girls swimming in
Yes.
this cohort, right? That could shift eventually, and maybe more boys would, but for now, the girls team is what grew just based on interest of elementary, middle school kids being ready for it. But so the crew thing, I just, it's a tough one because it is an amazing, great sport. It's just very, very expensive. And so I get that there's like I see the argument of equity on both sides of it. It's hard to know what that would even look like.
It's not a question of equity.
Well,
It's
no,
a question of-
I'm asking the question, how much would it be?
It's a question of necessity.
Huh?
We know how much it would be. The rowing team's total budget for the year for necessity, equipment, coaches, so on, is about $50,000, most of which comes from parents. Okay, and so whatever the historical reasons have been, at the moment, now that it's all transparent, that's far more than anybody else is paying. And so equity says, shouldn't we be paying for at least the necessities of that sport? And the necessities aren't being paid for.
So what is
And
the?
it doesn't show up here at all.
It's not on here.
14,000, what does that cover?
So the
Just
14,000 you see up there for crew covers the cost of the coaches, limited transportation, and $140 in miscellaneous.
Yeah.
And the club raises the balance of
Yeah.
the money to offset the rest
So
of the
what happens
expenses.
to a kid whose parents can't afford
They
that?
don't row.
Do you guys say that to them, or are there
No.
scholarships?
I think
don't know.
any of the,
Some of us pay more money, so.
I was gonna say, it's my understanding,
Yeah, that's.
and I don't, you'll tell us if this is a mandate or a strong suggestion, that our boosters, who are in any of that situation, certainly was my experience, made it clear that if you were interested in the sport and could not participate, please confidentially
Yes.
go to, and they named a person.
Yes.
Now,
It's
some people are gonna be comfortable with that,
Yes.
some people are not. I'm not, Dick, I'm not lost on that, but if we're gonna have a transparent conversation, let's talk about everything, that is something that gets said out loud. So that there's an attempt to address that in the current environment.
So we finish the story, that gets said out loud, but what doesn't get said out loud is some kids, knowing that, don't even dare to ask their
No,
parents.
I understand that.
So that we know for sure, in many cases, kids aren't participating for that reason.
Absolutely.
And if we know that, yeah, that's a shame. That's all.
No,
That's one sport where at the end of the year celebration is at Jacobs Beach because it's free. And the food's donated, the parents bring it, so it's not like they're going off and doing a huge
I
banquet. at
had a
Woodward's.
kid on the crew team as well,
Yeah,
for 4 years,
so-
so I understand.
So
Yes.
it is, and I can't remember again, because I split the cost, but I recall, I think it's around $750 per parent. Per child,
Yeah.
so, or not per parent, but per child, so it is a lot of money. And it's not the frivolous stuff, right?
Right.
Like
Yep.
Not the
swim
banquet.
banquets at Woodward's,
Well,
it's not
so-
the bank.
Right, I had a
So
friend
I'm
say
gonna-
to me, like, her son runs track, she buys sneakers,
Right.
that's it. right? And then there's other sports where they're buying, like the hockey equipment. I mean, I have friends whose kids buy thousands of dollars in equipment. And it's just that piece that's never gonna be even, like he buys running sneakers, this mom and dad buys $2,000 worth of hockey equipment. So there is a threshold to even get into the sport that can really be prohibitive to some
Yeah,
families,
those
but that's outside of our control.
That, I was gonna
From the
say,
nature
pieces
of the
of that,
sport.
pieces of
Right,
that are,
just the
right.
nature of the sport.
If I can, so I'm gonna suggest, if you don't mind, because these are important issues that we want to raise and talk about, but are not gonna get solved tonight. That we at least get through the rest of the presentation. And we may be stopping with other questions, as we. Thank you.
The next series of slides, the next 3 slides give you some historical look back. And so broken out by supplies, other expenses, and coaching salaries, along with medical trainer cost, shows you the increases over time. I actually think that page 21 of your budget book shows that better. So page 21 of your budget book shows that in 1920, the total athletic line was $280,000. Proposed for next year, the total athletic line is $529,000. And so again, while this is a small amount of the overall budget, we have been focused on this, and the board knows. Every time we have an opportunity to hold a public hearing to talk about our budget, we hear from the athletic community. We know the impact that sports have on students and families and the community. And again, right, everybody remembers those components. So what you see here is just some of that historical expenditure. And you'll notice that there are years where the expenditure is over the budgeted number. There are years where we have expended 117% of the budget, 106% of the budget. The years that we are over expended that is where we go to student activity and gate receipts. Those funds help us to offset when we overspend. It is difficult to project exactly what you're going to spend on athletics because the seasons are variable. If teams go deep into the
That's 7
postseason,
championships.
that comes with additional expenses. If we buy championship jerseys, if that, right, all of that has additional expense. And so we thought that the historical comparisons were important. And then we've sort of touched on this. But slide 28 shows you both the overall budget historically, and it shows you the percent of the overall budget. We're talking about less than 1% of the overall budget when we talk about these athletic expenses. It has an outsized impact on students, on families, and on the community.
Yep.
I apologize. They're numbered on my computer. So I'm looking at the athletic expenditures.
This one?
Yep.
So, so we can celebrate the fact that we're having a comprehensive, really first-rate athletic program with great results at less than 1% of our entire budget, which means that, and we're offering 60% of our high school students a chance to participate in something that we all agree is not simply extracurricular, but actually really important and enriching to kids. And so it seems to me that as we talk about this going forward, adding some money to athletics over time in order to bring it to some reasonable level isn't talking about an order of magnitude of dollars. It's the base that we've got here is really great and effective. And we're so near yet so far for some houses. And so we're near there. I mean, we should be able to do this in a couple of years.
And we've heard, I mean, we have to be elected. We have heard from our voters. And, you know, times are different than they used to be. And we've heard very clearly from our voters. They want us to invest in athletics. So we really need the numbers of what it costs to fully fund the programs, not the banquets, just the actual sport itself. And what we need to do, so we can look at it and say, this is something we can tackle in 10 years. This is something we can not tackle. This is, you know, whatever it is. We really need to see those, the full cost of what it is for each sport. And when we decide, and maybe crew, we don't buy the boats, hockey, we don't buy the pads. Lacrosse, we don't buy the pad, like that type of thing. There's, each sport has its nuance, like, I believe more.
So when you say fully funded, are you buying everyone sneakers? Are you buying everyone sticks or?
No.
what do you-
No.
No, we would have to put a marker in the ground, and again, I think it would be going back to the idea of saying. Coaches at what we consider an appropriate level. Transportation at what we consider an appropriate, right? It would be the items that we have identified on that slide and facilities, right? For golf, for swim, for hockey, we would have to identify those. I think the challenge for crew is going to be when we look at the equipment line. And so I do think that we've got a solid foundation. I think that the four of us could go back and dig into this more and try to create that. And again, we'd be putting a pin in the ground. I guarantee you that all of the booster organizations who are contributing in some degree to that wouldn't agree with where we plant the pin. We would probably come back and say that lacrosse coaching is going to be at the level that we current fund and doesn't include the 2 additional coaches that they have been providing for the past several years. But it would be a starting point. And then that pin would be negotiable every single year that we do a budget.
And we can, and if it comes down to that, we talk to the other schools and say, how many coaches do you have? And then we look around and say, okay, each team has 6 coaches. Okay, we have 6 coaches. Like it's work.
It fluctuates based on sport,
And I'm
based
sure
on
the booster
number.
clubs will be more than happy to help figure out what we actually spend as a community each year on sports.
Do we have, like we do with class size, do we have sort of like number of coaches required per athlete?
Again, it's different per sport, and no, I don't think it's as, right, I don't think CIAC has those numbers. And
what
we've never
about-
made a policy the way we did for
Yeah, it would be
classrooms.
interesting if, I wonder if we can think about that, or even like transportation. Do we have, I would imagine transporting 50 kids with hockey equipment, 50 kids with football equipment is much different than 50 kids going to a cross-country race. Like, do we,
It's the exact same.
right, but like you've got all that extra stuff, like, is
Doesn't
it?
matter. Yeah.
That's my question.
Yeah, but
So
it's
that's my question is, do we need to have different parameters for transportation that make transporting students safer if it's,
That's not.
I don't know.
The difference again comes for those sports where we lack facility, right? So the football team only travels to away games. All the practice and all the home game doesn't have that expense.
Mhm.
The hockey team, the swim teams, the golf team, they have to travel for every practice and for every meet because we don't have a home facility
right?
for
But
them
my
to
question is
participate.
about like per number of butts in a seat. Like, do we have something that says if a bus carries 60 kids, that's like what's the max? Like, do we have any kind of parameters
There
right
isn't
now?
actually a bus convention off the top of my head.
So, and it's based on.
It's
the bus
roughly
company?
75 for a
Okay.
bus, and it's different for elementary and high school kids, but I don't remember
And-
those
and so-
numbers.
So we maintain the same number of buses per student, regardless of the sport and the equipment that they're also carrying.
The real complication there is relatively new, and it has to do with the driver shortage. And so and we've put additional transportation money into this budget with the assumption that we're gonna have to be hiring more coach buses in the future simply because we can't get enough school bus drivers to be able. We've had teams stranded after an event until very late in the evening. We've had teams that generally get practice transportation, and we've had to take their bus away from them because another team needed to get to an away event, and that took precedence over a practice that was happening. And so that's a complication. Jason?
I just want to state the obvious, but something that has been brought forward here, though, is budgeting for the unknown, and that's every sport season can end at the end of the regular season,
Yep.
or it can go all the way to the regionals, which requires hotel,
Yeah.
transportation, and so forth. So, it's to get an exact number, you might have to center or focus on the regular season in terms of budgeting, but just please understand that, you know, in any given year, you might have unexpected costs officiating.
We will
your
pay
athletic
for all the state championship costs, don't worry.
No, but I mean, I think the point is that, I'm sorry,
Oh, go
you're
ahead.
not finished,
Nope.
go ahead. It
Nope.
does create a challenge. What I'm hearing a little bit is also it creates a challenge of comparison between sports, right? If a team goes to the states and another team unfortunately that year doesn't, you're spending more on the team that goes to the states, but that's not because you care about them more, it's because they have costs that are.
Because
And we're gonna look at that in a minute.
Beyond the season. As well.
That also, we're gonna look at that comparison in a minute, and that has a lot to do with the real variability about how many sign up for the sport that year. Right, and so especially when you've got boys and girls teams, that the base expenditures are the same, but then one enrolls a lot higher than
Sure.
the other, then you end up with a disparity in how much you're spending per student, but only because of the interest. And again, that goes back to one of the very earliest slides. When you've got 30 different offerings, then that variability starts to get teased out as well. Now, we've gone back and forth about whether we should even be talking about the comparison per student, because we're talking about investing and providing the opportunity. And remember, these are apples and carburetors.
Yeah.
Some sports just cost more than other sports to be
Absolutely.
able to provide.
So, Mr. Petrick, to answer your question, and things vary, there's a lot of variables, the numbers are here. To have a sport, boys basketball, these numbers will change a little bit. If they need some more, if they need
Yeah,
some
and
more.
it's not.
But
not
I'm just
fully
giving-
Funded, right, so that's the easy one, right?
That's not just-
The difficult one is hockey,
Yes,
swimming.
those are difficult
crew.
because, like you said, it's
Those are
the
low,
outside
it's not,
costs,
it's
yes.
not all the sports.
But the other sports, it's here, about 90%. I mean,
Most of them. we
some
have-
might need different things, a uniform, or $4,000 new uniforms in a year. You know, that might increase their cost. Some coaches have everything, they just need 6 basketball. So things kind of flex, but those other sports you talked about, the crew and the hockey is always a variable because of the ice time.
Yep.
And how far you go in our practices, but with the crew. The Rowing Inc. owns the boats. And as Mr. Hurst said, they're $20,000 to $60,000 for a boat, so
I hear you.
my supplies,
I don't know,
all,
but think
so.
about how much the gym costs.
I'm not questioning-
Plus the-
You're right.
So my
It's easy
supply
to say
budget,
that's an expensive sport, but we spend bonded money, millions of dollars.
I do.
so my
want to-
supply budget is $60,000. That's to have everyone have a ball to play a game.
Yeah.
So if I just pull one boat, I couldn't put any
And
ball.
I think the boats, like hockey equipment, can be kept out of it. And you only need a new boat every 10 years.
Depends on how big your
6
cost
years.
is.
So,
First of all, we don't buy new boats.
What about
buy
you?
used boats.
Yes, we buy used boats. But you're right. Even when we do that, right, as we work to do that, there will have to be some decisions that get made. And again, traditionally, football buys a lot of equipment. I don't know why, but it always has, and we do. And hockey doesn't. Crew will have, right, we will be making some arbitrary decisions, and we will try to be really clear and report those out to you about how those
But the
decisions were made.
principle we're discussing here is we shouldn't be comparing one sport to another. Whatever it takes to do justice to a sport, whatever that means, we should accept that some sports cost more per student. That's just the nature of the game.
with some nuance.
Yeah, and so all I'm saying is we shouldn't worry about if we're spending more money on one sport than another. We should worry about whether we're spending enough for one sport.
Right.
Versus enough. And that's what we're trying to get at is, are we doing justice to the athletes with the equipment and the coaches and the venue that is required? If we can't do that, then either we should end the sport or raise more revenue. So what's good, it's no different to saying, how many students should be in a kindergarten class before we get a new teacher? Okay, and what equipment is needed, what books are needed? These are true extracurricular things. Kids are participating. In many cases, it's very important. It makes a lot of difference, particularly post-COVID in the lives of kids. Luckily, our athletic program is doing well. I mean, our kids are benefiting from it.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that in fact, we don't get parents who are constantly being overtaxed.
I just want to voice one voice of caution in that we're not good at saying no. And so historically, when a group of parents came forward and asked for a crew team, we found a way to do it. And then it was done for lacrosse, and most recently it was done for swimming. And so we have found creative and unusual ways to allow those things to happen when those proposals have come forward. Moving forward, we can anticipate that there will be proposals for an esports team or a sailing team or for other new programs. And we will constantly be balancing how many students are enrolled in the school, how many different programs can you support, and how does the non-athletic parent portion of the community who also votes for and contributes to our budget feel about, and again, I get it. I understand that it is less than 1% of the overall budget, but that's constantly part of that equation. And so we sunsetted a cheerleading team. We've now brought the cheerleading. At what point would we say we are eliminating a team? Because
That's a legitimate question.
When they've left 10 members.
right, well, it's one that I worry about because we're not good at that part.
I would like, I guess I feel like, because of the conversations that are happening, to just say out loud, perhaps as a member of the board for 12 years, where we are in this place is the result of decisions made by the administration and by the Board of Ed. We have had teams over the past 12 years, where people come to us and the Board of Ed made decisions to or to not fund those things. So I want to make sure that we are in the context of shared decision-making here. And it may be that members of the board presently weren't part of those decisions. But these have been board decisions. The funding decisions on the athletic line have been board decisions as well as administrative decisions. Doesn't change how we want to move forward. I would just like to say that context out loud.
There's only one number in here that I don't see, and what has, and that is what we've been taking in on the gate and ticket sales.
So we're gonna.
Oh, is that coming up?
Thank you.
So I'm going to relatively quickly then say that your presentation shows you those comparables by students, and I won't necessarily linger on those other than to say that some sports are approximately $300 per student and some can go as high as $3,000 per student. And again, to Dr. Hirsch's point, they're just different. And if we want to provide the opportunities, some are going to cost more than others. And that is, in my mind, an equity decision. It's about providing the opportunity, not saying every athlete gets this much dollars allocated to them. But then we do have an entire conversation about gate receipts that we do want to point out. And so gate receipts, money that comes in the fall, you will see that football is the greatest fundraiser. Friday night home games, tickets are sold, community comes out, and we raised approximately $14,000 last year at our stadium field. The fall sports generated $21,000 of revenue.
Can I say something?
Of course.
We only charge, so an example being for boys soccer games on Friday, and we have to do it at 3:45 because the trainer has to go to the football game at 7 o'clock. We don't charge on that 3:45 game. We only charge them the lights when we're at night.
Yeah.
So if the field hockey team is playing on Saturday at 1 o'clock, there's no gate charge. The only charge is when we turn on the lights on the turf field.
Thank you.
And because as we charge everyone who comes, like, do high school students pay or do they get?
We charge it. We offer passes for students and adults. Whatever, it's $5 for adults, $3 for students.
Okay.
You can buy a season pass that gets you into sport all
$50 for an adult.
Season pass, again, I don't know off the top of my head, I think it was 25, 30 for a student. And then 50 or 60, I don't know.
Yeah, about right.
I know that there has been conversation about not charging students. I will add this piece because I know that Ms. Chaff would be upset with me if I didn't add this piece. Part of the concern on a Friday night at the stadium field is also about supervision. And right now, we have younger students, younger Guilford residents who come to the games. They don't come in the presence of an adult. They're dropped off at the game. They pay their $3 and they're not necessarily there to watch the game. And there's a lot of running around. There's a lot of students leaving the stadium field out in the parking lot or on the upper field. While I don't think that, how much was it for students? $3?
$3.
Well, I don't know that $3 is a significant investment for family, but there are increases in the budget this year for supervision at athletic events as well, because we do have concerns about supervision. And I do worry that if Friday nights under the lights at the stadium field were completely free, that we'd have to invest yet more in supervisory expenses. And so there's a little bit of a balance about opening up the gates literally, and being able to supervise our students properly and make sure that those students are safe and making good decisions while they're with us at the games. That changes a little bit for indoor events, and that's about controlling the space. You will see that winter sports, we don't raise nearly as much as we do for fall sports.
Can I just ask a question? Especially with the stuff under the lights and the outdoor stuff. Why can't we make a rule that if a child is, they do it in movie theaters, if a child is under the age of 13, you have to have an adult on the premises? Why can't we make that a rule? I mean, I know it's hard to enforce, but then when a kid does something wrong, we have recourse. I don't understand why we can't do that.
There is something to piggyback on that. One of the things that was going through my head is, especially because, going to a Friday night football game, you see the upper field and you see the amount of kids that are playing up at the upper field. Can we do something like no readmittance? Like once you're in the stadium field, you don't come out.
We could do whatever we choose to do. I worry about that because then you've got a 12-year-old who chose to leave, and now we as adults and as educators are saying, you can't come back in here. And I think we'd end up with worse decision making than if they leave for a little bit and then do come back to us. We can do any of those
I'm not
things.
saying we're going to solve this now.
No, and again, right, I would leave that for other conversations.
Yeah.
But I wanted to name it because I know that the charging of gate receipts as a practice has been questioned. And I think the same logic could be made. It's only $40,000 that you raise. Why not wipe it clean and we'll just cover it and have a wonderful community event? I think there's something to be said about purchasing a ticket to be there for the event. We have encouraged, especially at the middle school, that if you're sending your students, make sure there's an adult with them, but pairing them up and checking them and keeping them together, we don't have the level of supervision to enforce that. So
No, but it really comes into play that if something goes south and the parents aren't on the premises, then we have recourse. You can't come back to any more games for the rest of the season or something along those lines. I personally would not leave either of my kids when they were 13, or Ms. out of facility alone.
Yeah.
I just, too much. There's too much temptation, too much trouble. And it's mixing the 13-year-olds with adults, with older high school kids who it's not a good mix. I mean, that's just my personal opinion about being a parent, but
we could do anything that we want with those structures, but I think that's probably beginning to be a bigger
I
conversation.
was just gonna say,
that's a
let's
larger
stick with the
I know I opened the door to this,
budget.
but
Yeah, let's stick with the budget for now.
Last comment on it, I just suggest the next time you go to a Friday night football game, go down to the concession stand, which is still inside the premises, and just look at what the younger students are doing over there, because we need at least 2 adults just over there, and even then at times it's overwhelming. Because the kids are getting on the roof of the shed, they are wrestling, and it's not just horseplay, like they could get injured. And in the meantime, we have a whole crew of high school kids on the other end of the field as well that we need to monitor at the same time. So it's not, and I'm talking about the kids who leave the stadium. I'm talking about the kids in the stadium.
so I know there was a question that we responded to today about some of the lines around site supervisors, right? So we are looking to increase both the rate of our teachers that we invite back on Friday nights, so we get more takers. But I also think we've talked about needing to increase the numbers of folks who are present at those sorts of events.
And I'm sorry to wrap this up pretty soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Well, question about gate receipts. A while back in the conversation, Paul, you mentioned when a team goes far into the kind of after regular season play, that gate receive
Yes.
are a source of that. What is that pool used for besides that, or is that mostly what that pool is used?
Yep, so gate receipts last year across 3 seasons totaled $38,000. And the expenditures are here. Here
Oh,
are the types
sorry.
of things. That's okay. No, we're fully aware of the fact that we gave you 39
No,
non-numbered
this is-
slides
this
on
is
this
good.
presentation tonight. It's a lot. So the expenditures went to things like this.
Yep.
So
This is
sometimes they
great.
paid for dues, sometimes they paid for again, golf fees
Yep.
to be on the course fees. Pool rent, you see the types of things that we expended those dollars on. A plaque, because the baseball team, right?
Well, the conference championship first, second time ever.
And
Yeah.
so sometimes it is a celebratory shirt for the conference championship teams. Sometimes it's the plaque to put in it could be any of those. And sometimes they're reoccurring fees. When we end up going over budget, this is the line that can
Yep.
bail us out.
Yeah.
You'll also note that while we brought in $38,000 last year, we expended $48,000. So this fund can roll over. It is different than an operational fund. So when we bring those dollars in, we try to keep a balance. And when we have a short year, we will expend in this place. So again, the vast majority of the dollars we spend comes out of your approved operational budget. $529,000 that we're requesting this year. It is small in comparison to the rest of the budget, but it's $500,000 that we request from the operational budget. An additional $50,000 that we raise from gate receipts, really small in comparison to the budget, but that used to be the number that we budgeted for teachers. That was one FTE until very recently when we upped it to $65,000. And then the enormously generous, complicated, multifaceted, and confusing conversation about what our boosters raise. We are, when you think about it, not completely separated from pay for play. There is a pay for play spirit that runs through the community. It hits some sports a lot more than it hits other sports, but we still rely on the generosity of our community to help fund these programs. So it's the operational budget, it is the gate receipts and the student activity account, and then it is the monies that we raise from those boosters that have historically funded our athletic program. I'm hearing that we want to not put the boosters out of business, but we at least want to be able to get an idea of what it would cost over time to make them unnecessary and completely ancillary to what we do. And while this budget, I firmly believe, like last year's budget, takes a big step in that direction, we will work on detailing that answer better for you so that you have a better understanding of what that includes.
Small question, the athletic, I've had this asked a couple of times, the athletic trainer. And I asked it in our questions because I've had a lot of families ask me this. How is their time allotted for sport? Because I'm imagining there's some, and you don't have to tell me today, but I just would like to understand on any given day when they're here, if there are 15 football players that need them and 2 of this team, like how does that, is that on a daily basis, you guys kind of just, they decide that? Or is there like a thoughtful process to say, let's be equitable about this and make sure that the teams are all getting time with them?
There's not a thoughtful process of equity.
Yeah.
We built this new school, we put the training room down the athletic hallway. We built the new school, we put the training room down the athletic hallway. And
Yeah.
we did that so that when all the athletes walk down to the locker rooms at the end of the day, they pass the training room. So they can go in there, trainers here about 1:30, check with the school nurse, works on some stuff about injuries. People can walk down to practice, go in and out with them, and then he covers through their contract all varsity games.
All home games or away as well?
Away football,
Okay.
hockey's all the way because that's DJ,
Right.
but only home.
For the most part, they have to be available.
So what you have in a school with East Haven, when we're hosting them, we have the trainer on site to take care of both teams, and we go to East Haven.
They have got.
Their trainers there to help.
What happens to the sports that don't happen in the building?
So swimming,
swim.
hockey,
So if there's an injury, then we have the coaches report it to the trainer or make sure they tell the trainer. And then we'll have the trainer reach out to the kid and say, hey, when you go down the athletic, call me tomorrow after school, stop by the office and see.
I had my son spent time
This
in
is
the
what
trainer's
we hear,
office.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
no, you
yeah.
just, but
Bus
you,
is leaving for practice and they can't see the trainer.
well, they have to time it. They have to.
and we
So not
currently,
pointing
we
a
currently
finger, I'm
contract for
saying it's
one
not very-
trainer.
Huh?
Yeah.
Right now, we currently contract for one
Right.
trainer.
Right.
And when there are multiple events going on at home, the trainer has access to a golf cart and a radio to try to be everywhere.
Because everything's at 3:45, 4
Yes.
o'clock. So
Yeah,
there's a baseball game going on or a track
Softball game.
meet or a lacrosse, they're
Yeah.
running around, the tennis.
Good question about community fundraising. Just to, to your point, you brought up a lot of how our community, just gives back specifically to the boosters. In other communities, I know we don't do it here, and I know it's not big in Connecticut. But you also have maybe business dollars that are funded, sponsors.
Yeah.
Is that something that we've ever explored? Is it something, I don't see it very often in outside districts, Tell me what the downside to that is, because I know there is one, otherwise we'd be doing it.
So it's not something that we have explored as a board here in Guilford. Prior to coming here, in another shoreline community, we did a lot of work looking at creating a policy that would open the doors, but control
Yeah,
the access to
yeah.
take sponsorships, advertising dollars. You don't see it in a lot of our neighboring communities, but some schools will sell space on the outfield fence for local vendors and
Scoreboards. all that.
businesses to buy scoreboards. Pretty much every year, Coca-Cola offers to buy us a new scoreboard. It'll be bigger and better than the one we have, and 40% of it will say Coca-Cola on it. So that's an opportunity. Most of our locals don't do that. We could have that conversation at a policy committee level. We could talk about whether or not. So the business manager, the athletic director, who we were talking about earlier, and I worked on a policy in another school district, copied other exemplars, brought it forward. The Board of Ed spoke about it, had public hearings, and voted it down and chose not to. I think the downside is right, the extreme that some board members voiced being concerned about was, do we sell space on our uniforms? Do we?
Yeah, to what end? And then it also becomes a matter of you're now allocating specific monies from corporate dollar, from sponsorship dollars. What happens if they go away? And how do you fill that back in? Do you
Yes.
lose a team because somebody drops out? It's like ESSER money. Yeah.
well, is
it-
there also the possibility of the business or company having employees or CEOs whose kids are on our teams and then an outsized source of influence or perceived influence?
Influence would be my number one concern. Yeah.
Those are all the downsides, right? Do we want to open up our student population to advertisers, right? Our kids are sort of bombarded by advertising. Do we want to bring that into, right? And this policy had looked at, outdoor venues, banners that could be hung during a game for a home basketball game, but then taken down so that they weren't up during PE classes, right? What does it mean if we offer space in our stadium field? And is it permanent? Is it there during PE classes when now kids are here receiving their free and appropriate public education and exposed to advertising? Can you control it and only offer it at night? And a board member who just said, honestly, I don't want naming rights for our high school field. That's not the way we're going to name things. And I don't want uniforms that start looking like NASCAR jumpers. And so I think those are the concerns. We have never brought that forward to you at a policy level to discuss. We certainly could have that conversation as a community if we chose to. The easier route, the route that more schools have gone, and there was a big movement in this direction since 08-09 when budgets got really difficult, was pay for play. It was the idea that schools said only 60%, right? Only 60% of our kids take advantage of this. If you want to do this, there's a flat fee per season. It's $300 per season, but it's a cap of $500 per student. It's a cap of $1,000 per family. And that was a way, it was easier. It didn't open up to those other influences.
Yeah.
But we fastidiously avoided that in Guilford. We never wanted to go the pay for play route. And a lot of other local systems do. There, right? There's a simple, you pay this much in the beginning of the year, and it goes into something really similar to that activities account, but it's a much bigger and much more predictable number because of the fee structure. We've never moved that way because we didn't have to. The community was stepping up voluntarily, organically, messily, but they were stepping up and filling that gap, and we never wanted to move in that direction.
I have a really miscellaneous. This is totally off topic. But the baseball plaque made me think of it. Does the school have anywhere where like school records are kept, like in track and field? Where is that?
So
It's in the hallway, right?
in the athletic hallway,
Yeah.
the track team has a board now.
Okay, the reason I'm asking this, and this is again kind of personal, but what about the swim team? Because we don't
Swim
have,
team they just put a board in at the YMCA where they practice. The
Oh, did they?
YMCA put a board in, but we did.
but not here in the building or anything.
No.
Okay. Just, I was thinking about that, because they practice, but they play in Branford, so we have all the Branford records.
With the new building, we didn't take, I don't think we had boards in the old building, to be honest, if I remember correctly. So there wasn't like basketball leading scorers or this and that. It's more, the only thing that happens is in the wrestling room, they have banners of who won the state championships and
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. I grew up in Shelton, and so there was like a whole wall with all records and trophies and plaques and things like that that would go through the years. That
yeah, we have some stuff down the athletic hallway. We put up all conference teams, what I've done. I started down other schools. So when we came to this school, everyone that's made all conference, I take their picture and I put it up on the wall as you walk down the athletic hallway.
Oh, that's
So you can see it down there on the wall.
It starts in the commons and then it wraps
Wraps
around the
around.
hall and goes all the way down that
That's
athletic
great.
hallway where you can see a history of trophies and plaques and awards and recognitions.
And our idea when we built it is the kids have to go there to the locker room, so they pass.
It's all, yeah, the walk fast is great.
Thank you very much for being here, for all of this information, for answering questions and for being part of the conversation. Clearly, there's more discussion we should be having at some point, but this is a lot of information and I really appreciate it.
And we recognize that this is just about as decisive as the class size conversation, right? These are big, complicated, messy conversations with lots of good answers, and we have to choose which direction we want to go, and we will absolutely follow your direction and continue to provide you with the information you're looking for so that you can make those decisions. Again, I do want to note the budget as it sits in front of you, right? And on page 21 of the budget book includes an increase to athletic spending this year of $79,351. That includes a number of assistant coaches that were requested, head coach for cheer as that returns, as well as some miscellaneous increases to lines like transportation, the ice and the pool time, and the site supervisor line that we were just discussing a little bit.
Now I think we need to increase by more.
More than, yeah, so again, right, there's a significant, I want to be clear that as the community comes out and talks about the importance of the athletic program to them, we want to be responsive to those community members. We haven't, right, to the order of magnitude comment, we could increase this by another $100,000 easily. It would not necessarily have a significant impact on the overall budget when you look at that bottom line, but it is part of the overall package of compromises and priority decisions that you're being asked both before and after this budget goes to the Board of Finance.
All right, well, thank you, both. We have an opportunity to continue discussing the budget. Mr. Jarvis, if you would like to exit.
Thank you. And
And
while I know we may
Chap,
come back
same
to
thing.
athletics, I did want to offer Jake the opportunity.
No,
to sneak out of here,
absolutely.
and Julie as well.
Absolutely, both of you. Thank you very, very much for
Thank
Thank you,
for
Jay.
spending so much time with us tonight. Again, we have submitted 2 sets of questions to Mrs. Trudeau and Dr. Friedman over the last week and gotten responses. There's another few questions I submitted today, but tremendously and in very fast order. Mrs. Trudeau has gotten back to us.
Just to be clear, some of the ones from today are not complete. There were a few that we weren't able to
Right.
complete. We teased those out, but we didn't want to sit on all of them because
No.
some were more quickly answered.
Absolutely appreciate it. Again, we're gonna be coming back here next Monday to vote, to make a final vote. So there's an opportunity here to spend a little more time tonight, ask further questions, talk about our thoughts about the budget, things we may want to consider in terms of reductions, things we may want to consider in terms of additions. Because those are the concrete discussions we need to have in a week. So I want to open it up to my colleagues to see if there are areas either for more questions of the administration or discussion among ourselves as we're each considering thoughts on these topics.
What's the, just look, and what's the cap number for kids per class in grade 4? What's the
20
recommended one?
The
24.
recommended number is 24.
24.
That's nine.
Yeah, and none of those are presented as hard caps. None of them are caps
They're
or triggers,
recommended.
they're recommendations, and we
Yep.
should track to them to the extent possible, and I should report out to you when we go above or below the ranges, but they're not hard.
I hear you may have a follow-up to that.
Well, I was just gonna say, I was kind of looking at that I was looking at the numbers that lead between grades 3 and 4, and I know that one of the proposed positions is a 4th grade teacher. However, if you combine those 3 classes into 2, they do come out to be 24 each. I know it's not what we like to do, but in terms of looking at things that need to go and class sizes, and I think there was a statement the other night that we generally don't go from 3 classes down to 2.
I think it depends on the numbers.
Right.
And then, and I don't know what this threshold is, right? So we have a recommendation that's 24.
Right.
So are we comfortable with 2 classes of 24, knowing someone might move in? Right, no, it's just, I'm, out loud. Or do we approach any of these grade level recommendations and say, sometime in the year, someone might move in. So we start one below that, or you know what I mean?
Oh,
But I hear what you're saying. I actually did a fair amount of looking at this enrollment and enrollment pages over the weekend. Because one of the things I noted too is that there are, and I think this happens I know this happens on a regular basis. We have at least three within an elementary school, a grade in which teachers are going to have to be moved, right? For kind of classes in a first grade, they're now going into a second grade. There are 3 second grade teachers. You can't combine them reasonably, so a teacher is going to be shifted somewhere, right? We know that happens. Dr. Friedman, I did have a question, or I would like you to explain about something that you and I briefly talked about today, because we did get at least one email from a community member concerned about thinking about taking the week kindergarten from 3 to 2 because of open choice coming there. And the conversation you and I had today is, we don't know where our open choice kids necessarily are going next year in terms of which school. Is that a fair? Or do we know?
So ACES requires us to let them know the specific schools where we.
Even the specific schools by February.
Yes,
Okay.
and so, right, what's important about open choice is that we will be making our staffing decisions divorced from that consideration. We will decide what is right for the Guilford students who are currently enrolled, and then we will inform open choice of this. And so at this time, and that we're gonna ramp up really quickly, right? At this time, we're only reporting to ACES spaces for next year's first grade. So because of this most recent conversation, we have reported to them that we will have 3 seats available each in Jones and Lakes at this time, because Cox and Leet are, at least for the moment, open questions. If at Leet we do collapse 3 sections to 2 sections and bring it up to 19 and 20 for a first grade cap of 22, then we can't offer 6 seats at that location.
Right.
And not, but at both Jones and Lakes, where there are 7 total sections, all that will still be sitting at 15s and 16s next year, we could easily accommodate 3 students in each of those settings, and we will not be challenging the boards, but we will not use open choice to correct falling off the low level, nor
No,
would
right.
we allow it to push us above the upper level. It will always be based on space available.
Okay,
Once we add a student to a school, open choice student to a school, we, that's their school, right? So they keep moving up all the way up.
Correct.
Oh,
So then for the next year, when we adjust, we do count that student.
Yes,
Right.
that is
But it'll
absolutely
be,
right.
but it'll be calculated. in the-
good clarification.
That's a really important
that's really
clarification. Once those students enroll, they become our student in every way. They are counted
Yep.
and measured. And yes, they're then enrolled in that local school, just as your students would be if you lived next door to that school. That's correct. We would then present the next year's open seats, counting those students in the same way that we count everybody else. Thank you. That's a really important clarification. Dr. Balstraci, the thing that I was going to note is, so if you look to the average, right, the average class size K through 4 is 17.1. While we follow the guidelines, the average makes it clear that we tend to track closer to the low end than we do to the high end. And the board policy makes clear that at year 1 and at year 3, we should be reconsidering those sections as the students move up and possibly collapsing classes as the range gets higher. The fact is that traditionally, and particularly the last 3 or 4 years, where we've been so concerned about student wellness and class size and management as we went into and then out of a pandemic, we've not been making those difficult decisions. This year, we're talking about it again, not because of the absolute enrollment, but because of the variation in that enrollment, because it is so skewed across the 4 schools compared to other years. And so if kindergartens were all enrolled at 15 and 16 moving forward, I don't think we'd be talking about the idea of collapsing it going into first grade, because that's still right on the low edge. And we've been tracking closer to the low edge than we have to the high edge. I opened up this conversation because as we move from K to 1, we're going to be significantly below the lower edge. And we need to be having that conversation about whether we should be eliminating a position there.
Yep.
You're exactly right. You can make that same discussion about a class of 48 in grade 3 and 4, because you could make 2 24s, but 2 24s is right on the hard edge. And that's that I didn't bring up because we got wiggle room K to 1. We don't have wiggle room in that one. It was the lack of wiggle room that got us into this situation with K, because we didn't have wiggle room. And for what it's worth, right, we track the summer enrollments. Murphy's Law always has them moving into the
wrong school.
right, into the neighborhoods that are up against
Yeah.
the higher line, and never where we're hoping they move in, because it's going to help us out with that lower edge.
Yeah.
And remind me, at Cox, we're 20, 19, and 19 right now, is that where we're at?
Yes, I believe that's accurate. Yes.
At Cox 2018 and 18.
No,
That's as of January 12th, I believe.
Yeah.
Oh,
there's-
sorry.
I believe there's an update from, you've got one dated January 12th.
Okay,
I
sorry.
believe it is more like 2019 and 19. right now,
Okay.
correct.
And the reason I brought that up is because, just because again, we heard from so many Cox parents about equity. I just want to remind you that in fact, we did collapse from 3 kindergarten classes to 2 first grade classes at Cox just a few years ago, right before the pandemic. It's the current 6th grade class collapse from 3 in kindergarten to 2 in first grade. So we have done it, and I think that that's part of what's playing into the Cox parents' claims of equity, is that like, you did it to us, and you're hemming and hawing about, is how they view it. I'm not saying that's what we're doing, but because we're discussing it. But I just wanted to point that out and remind the board that that is in fact what happened, and that's kind of where all the bad feelings, I think, are
Well, the
being
grade 3.
inherent.
We have done it. We've never done it as frequently as we have added, and we haven't done it recently. And again, all of that can be seen in that average, right? We don't do it strictly, right? We don't do it. I mean, if you look at the numbers, you're going to see third grade classes of 16s and 15s, right? Because we don't make a habit out of doing it really strictly. And again, particularly not recently in the last 4 or so years, because of concerns over class size coming into and out of this pandemic.
I'll just state, and I mean, it would be great to have really low class size across the board. I feel really, I feel like we have to really keep our tax-paying community in mind. 3 first grade classes of 13 seems really low to me. In a year where we're going to be requesting a budget increase somewhere between likely 4 and 5% increase for the 3rd year in a row. I am concerned about that. I'm concerned about maintaining something that low. And also then possibly trading off something else we could do in terms of budget spending.
We would be filling those seats with open choice is the plan.
Not at least, nope.
No.
So
No.
not at this time, and the reason was we needed to give those locations to ACES. They begin the process in February, so we needed to tell them where they were available. With LEAT being an open question and this conversation being debated, we needed to take that opportunity, right? We needed to go with what we knew and not with what we were anticipating. And again, I think that's also the right decision, because we shouldn't be counting choice students in getting us to the bottom line. We should be making that decision absolutely based on students enrolled today and not counting those prospective seats. We made clear to the community when you approved open choice that it would be done, and it wouldn't be done in a way that it was used that it didn't impact, or it wasn't used to rationalize budget decisions.
Right, we're not creating classrooms or spaces for
Right,
the open
right.
choice students. It's just what happens to be.
Yep.
Unrelated to.
Yes, it's an opportunity. I mean, we have things to talk about, because the more we talk about tonight, the more prepared we are next Monday.
This might be more a question for Linda.
Okay.
It's medical. Obviously, we're looking at a decrease of $800,000. One of the things that I wanted to get them just some clarification on is there's 2 lines in the medical insurance page that speaks to employee contributions as well as payments to employees who waive coverage. I guess my first part of the question is, how much of that is contractual? Is there contractual wording if someone waives, there's a certain dollar amount that's being, okay.
Correct.
Yes.
Got it.
And we did that a handful of years ago intentionally, because it was a savings to us. That buyout,
Sure, yeah.
getting them off the rolls, is a savings to us. And so we had a lot of employees who were in family situations where they were carrying 2 insurances.
Yeah.
Because why not?
Because they were automatically enrolled at that point, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in terms of contribution, how is that determined? Is that a percentage of salary? Is that?
So there's 2 pieces to it. One is the employee premium cost share, which is contractual. The rate is set in as part of their contract, how much they pay towards their insurance. The other piece of it, which is a smaller piece now, is retirees that still stay on our medical after they retire, and they pay us for their insurance.
Okay, yes.
But those rates are negotiated every time we negotiate a new contract at any of the bargaining units. And over the last 4 contract cycles now that I've been involved in negotiating, those shares have traveled up consistently. They always go up a few points in every contract negotiation.
And we're relatively level from last year, but we're adding FTE. So my assumption is that it's just because the overall premiums are less this year. Okay. Thank you.
There was another conversation that I had that is important to note. You noted that insurance cost is down $800,000 this year. That is netted into the budget as it sits in front of you. So that 5.4% increase counts that
Right.
reduced cost in medical savings. And when I presented from the podium back to you on the 11th, I noted that this budget includes 2 years of instructional investments that we avoided in the last 2
Because of
years
medical.
because of the significant medical increases. Last year, medical was up $800,000 of increased cost. That was more than a percentage point on the budget just for medical. The year before that, it was up 1.5 million. That was almost 2 percentage points just to pay for the medical. So this year, having it drop has allowed us to look at investing in certified and non-certified positions that are providing direct student support that we've had to defer over the last 2 years because of the medical expenses.
So we spent a lot of time in the last meeting talking about whether or not we should add a teacher to Cox. If we were to do that, which adds to the current budget, that either means we have to find it somewhere in the budget or increase the budget. So can we discuss further how we want to proceed? Because we're going to do it now, we're going to do it later.
I'm not sure we've decided that we're going to add a teacher to.
No, I said.
Oh, okay.
No, I think he's looking for.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
sorry, I misunderstood your question.
I mean, it seems to be left and it can't be left. It either has to be discussed today or the next time. So I'm just saying it's an addition to the budget, which we're allowed to do. And or it requires that we add it and take it away someplace else.
Well, are we required to identify where it needs to be taken away from, or can we suggest additions and then allow Paul and the administration to decide on their own or make suggestions to us where they would actually take the money from?
If we agree we're going to add it, then we know what we're facing the next meeting in terms of, okay, how are we going to do? If we aren't going to add it, that's worth knowing too, that's all.
Well, and when I presented to you on the 11th, there was a slide that showed areas where I thought you might want to consider increases and where you might want to consider decreases. And this elementary teacher existed on both lists.
Yep.
There was an
Yep.
elementary position because we anticipated the interest, we'd already heard the interest about adding a first grade at Cox, and there was an elementary reduction because I was acutely aware of the enrollment and kindergarten at Lee. Those two conversations could be done separately. You could do both. You could increase by one and decrease by one, which would be a wash. You could do neither. You could do one or the other. And there were a number of other items on that list, some that you might want to entertain more seriously than others, but and that wasn't the only one that appeared on both. Special education tuition is always a line where I show it on both. The Board of Finance, I think, traditionally asks us, do you really think you have enough in special ed? Because it's so volatile, do you think that you've covered it? On the other hand, when things get really tight, there is a contingency built into there. That is more than we would need next year if we simply take this year's existing cohort of students and move them forward into next year. So there's always this sort of opportunity to make reductions in those areas that assumes a bit of liability in the rest of the budget. If we do that, there's some risk involved in making those decisions. This budget doesn't account for any retirement savings. I remain, again, more cautious than ever about taking a retirement savings in this current environment. We have found some replacement costs. We're finding some cost with replacement now rather than savings related to a replacement. And whenever you were trying to talk and I just kept
No, no.
going, I'm sorry.
It's a small thing, but I'm just thinking about like curriculum changes and we're planning for an Italian teacher in high school. The mastery-based diploma credit requirements are changing for our freshman class. They're going to be taking financial literacy, but what happens to the mastery class for sophomores, juniors, seniors? Because we specifically staffed that to like provide for. So are those mastery teachers now gonna then teach a half a year of eventually financial literacy, and are they equipped for that, or is that gonna go to a math teacher? Or like, I'm just curious, and I know
Well,
that's
so
out, but we
when
should
we
be.
wrote the
talking-
budget, and checked with the state about that, they told us that it would be anybody who was grade band certified who could teach those courses, which meant that we planned for the current mastery-based diploma teachers to teach that half credit of financial literacy and maintain the staff the way it is. A week ago, 2 weeks ago, they came out with a new set of certification requirements and said that it needed to be either a math teacher, a social studies teacher, or a business teacher to teach those classes. So that was not included in the budget. So we are not looking at that change for next year because it isn't, the kids who are most impacted by that won't feel that change next year. So we will deal with that in next year's budget, keeping things the same for next academic year, budgeting.
So it'll be upperclassmen
We'll continue
requirement.
with the teachers that exist now, potentially taking both halves of that course.
Right, but I'm just saying, the kids who are freshmen now won't even be introduced to these classes until they're juniors.
Correct.
They can, as sophomores, begin to take them.
We will have the staff that's certified to teach that as sophomores.
It's a freshman now.
So
No,
in
they're freshmen now, they'll be sophomores next
Yeah.
year.
In the most absolute sense, the FTEs don't necessarily need to change because it's the same number of students, the same number of courses. That isn't always completely true in a school of our size because it comes down to individual positions and assignments. So right now, we think it's going to be a minimal budgetary impact. We need to work out some of the details in that.
It just got me thinking this
Yes.
weekend, I was like, oh.
Oh,
wait a
yeah, I got
second.
all of us thinking or upset equally.
Right.
I believe they stormed into my office.
Because we, yes, because things that will trickle, when you see curricular changes at a state level, you don't always know exactly what, and I'm learning this. You don't always know exactly what the financial impact and when it will incur. And we've already created our budget, but this is, okay, so you feel comfortable that.
At least on paper, yes, that it would be man, and again, when you're thinking at the state level, or even in really big districts, it's easy to say, well, the FTEs are the same, and so it's all gonna work out. But when you begin to get to smaller settings, it's not always that easy because,
Okay.
right, and we're not at a time where we could say that we're gonna take a bunch of full-time positions and reduce them to 0.8s and we're gonna be just fine. A few years ago, we could make those kinds of changes. If we do that now, we're gonna lose the teachers we have who are gonna find a 1.0 somewhere else, and we'll be hard pressed to find quality candidates willing to take a 0.8 in this current economy with the teacher shortage. And so we may have to finesse some of those decisions, but we're not worried about it impacting the budget as it sits in front of you today.
Thank you.
I want to circle back to Dr. Hershen, bring back up our kindergarten classes right now. We've had a discussion about whether or not the solution to this is to reduce a teacher at lead. I don't think that's the answer. I don't think that's how you create equity. I think we need to look at Cox and determine whether or not, specifically as we're at the top end, whether or not the decision is to add another teacher at Cox. I just want to state my opinion right there. We do not create equity by taking away from Lee. I feel confident about that. Whether or not we determine we need an additional teacher at Cox is a conversation for us there.
I just want to say, I disagree.
Okay.
I think we should reduce because then that also, you don't have to hire a fourth grade teacher at least. You could still expand to 3 teachers in 4th grade if you reduce 1st grade.
You mean when they
sections.
become 4th graders?
Right. So for next year, right, you're talking about 1st grade going from 3 to 2 and 4th going from 2 to 3. So I think that is, there's a lot of layers in there.
Sure.
So that's respectfully why I did.
It's also worth noting, if we don't make that reduction now, as this cohort moves into grade 1, when this cohort moves into grade 3, if we haven't had significant influx, we're now going to have 3 sections of 13 or 14 moving into 3rd grade, where the board recommended level range is from 18 to 24. You're now going to be possibly 5 students below the low end of those projected ranges. And so if not now, then it's probably something that would need to be reconsidered, if not in the second grade, then definitely in the third grade when
Right.
they're moving into that bigger.
And I'd agree with having that conversation now.
Well,
I
and-
just, I want to be clear, you know, it's,
We'll have more data.
Well, I respect that. For me, it's not just an equity issue. 13 kids per class in a first grade is a really low number. And if we had unlimited resources, that would be terrific. We don't. And I am just really concerned about asking for, you know, that we're having to deal with increases required by our needs, by inflation, by supply chain issues, by all those kinds of things. And providing, you know, recommendations that we do in terms of class sizes, and then maintaining first grade classes of 13. I think it's not just an equity issue. I think it's a financial, I think it's a kind of a responsible financial consideration.
I don't disagree with you. My concern becomes we are now fielding two classes at that same level that we're hearing from Cox parents at, right? They would in turn be a class of 20 and 19.
With an upper limit of 22.
Right.
So, that's just my opinion.
I hear you, and I agree that we need to be very respectful of the taxpayer dollars, but I'm generally open to increasing spending when it directly impacts the benefit of the kids. I think it's very difficult to take away once you've given it, and I think that, you know, parents would be upset, and rightfully so. And if we're going to, and I'm not saying that we should hold this class size to this size indefinitely, we should certainly revisit it every year, just like we would normally. I think it'd be very difficult to take away what we've already given. I think it's too late.
I have a question about that, though. I mean, we have increasing class sizes as kids move up through the system from K to 12. So I guess I don't see it necessarily as taking away. I see it as adjusting to movement, adjusting to kind of student capabilities. And again, that is why we have increasing class sizes as kids age in our system.
Yep, and we made, well, I did, but the board made those recommendations for a reason. I just think that given the detrimental effects that COVID has had on the kids, now is the time to be investing more time, lower class sizes, trying to catch up. I'm willing to put the, you know, money where our mouth is and really invest in these kids to get them back up to speed, rather than taking away cost. There's plenty of costs that can be removed in other places in the budget that doesn't directly impact the kids. So I'm not advocating to increase the budget. I'm advocating to increase a teacher at Cox temporarily until the class sizes work themselves out later. We can find, and not, what I'm not saying I will find, I would like to ask Paul to find, like, to cut the budget somewhere else to make up the difference.
You know, I live in the Cox district. I drive the local roads. I see the for sale signs. You know, my concern is what happens to Cox when we really hit that upper limit. And now we've got those classes that are all significantly higher than we want them to be. It's not to say that we're not going to have students move into, you know, other schools in town, but, you know, my concern is just it becomes, especially at that first grade level. I'd love to have this conversation in a year from now when we're talking about, you know, condensing it to a second grade class. But I just feel that first grade class deserves to have those, you know, those class sizes that we ultimately want.
Time's up.
Change discussion.
On this conversation, Moira and I, at our last meeting, were kind of looking at a state document. Is there any consideration from the state level that we might start seeing mandates on class sizes?
No conversations that I've been aware of. And,
It wouldn't dare.
no, and again, right, so
Yeah.
at a state level, your published high end is low compared to a
Yeah.
lot of other communities in the state of Connecticut. So I know that we're talking about kindergartens and first grades at 19 and 20.
Mhm.
That would be considered low. And I communicated with a parent today who came from a setting where her child was in a class of 25 at that age range. So, right, I just want to be clear that this whole conversation we're having is about small class sizes. And we're talking about really thoughtful variations within all of our classes that can be described as small, particularly when you look at the average. And I caution every time I say it out loud, but average class sizes of 17.1 with an elementary high of 22, those are really, really positive class sizes that any community would be jealous of.
Um,
So we have two responses. We have one response which says the numbers are okay. That is, it's not a budget question for those people. In another case, people are concerned about increasing the budget. So on principle, we have to decide whether we think the numbers are adequate without adding somebody. I mean, we're being asked, and it's as if the parents are asking us to deal with the class size issue. And now we gotta decide whether we want to go up against the limits or we want to go the other way.
Well, and if it would be helpful, the next time the board meets, we can come in with some more concrete recommendations for reductions that we can suggest to the board. For instance, the board is already aware that we've identified a reduction of $21,000 that we can take in pension. That's just a drop in the bucket, but we can come back with some recommendations about places that you can consider reductions. They will not all be that easy, I assure you. There's going to be other ones that involve more loss than taking something that easy. I think if the board has those recommendations from us, the administration, you might be in a better position to then talk about 2 elementary teaching positions, or possibly, remember, there's a new drama teaching position at Adams. There may be some other suggestions that you can then talk about more concretely if you have some other reductions that you can think of as offsetting to the increases that at least some board members I hear wanting to consider.
But independent of the budget, we seem to have a disagreement about whether we should add on principle to keep the numbers down as per the request. And that's got nothing to do with the budget at the moment. Whether we can afford it or not is the next question. If we wanted to add it, can we afford it? Seems to me we should be able to discuss and decide whether or not we want to add a position on the principle that we think we don't want to be up against that top end. If we decided now that no, the numbers are fine, we can live with the top end because relative to other districts, well, okay, that solves a $70,000 problem the next time we talk. So we got on the table people saying they want the position. I would support that myself. But I don't know, so we may be split on that, which is fine. But we're in the conversation, we might as well sort of resolve it at the principal level this time so that we can talk budget next time. And if we find out that we want to reduce it tonight, I mean, increase it tonight, and we can't find the money next time, so we simply say, okay, that we can't afford it.
Right.
I do have 2 questions. The first one's the easy one. What brought about the request for drama at Adams?
It is a proposal from Dr. Mullen to be able to provide specials at Adams that look more similar to the specials that are offered at the high school, where students will have the ability to choose. She has started to be able to do more of that in music, where students can now choose not just performing groups, but also some general music offerings. We expanded from 1 to 2 tech ed teachers previously, and with the expansion of drama, she will be able to provide to the 7th and the 8th graders the ability to look at a suite of choices and make some of those decisions. I can invite her to be at your next meeting to be able to describe. I know that she described that to you when we met with
Yeah, I'm
administrative
looking at my
team.
notes right now.
I'd be happy to invite her to come. I kind of think she's watching at home right now. I can certainly invite her to give you a better, more detailed explanation. But it would be an extension of the specials offerings so that they would now include a world language offering at Adams, as well as a variety of musical offerings done with current staffing, choices within tech ed, and the ability to choose drama as something that they want to move into.
So it's a want, not a need.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
It is it's an extension of opportunities that we would be extending to the students. It is not a necessity. No.
Okay.
No, absolutely not.
And I think you know where my second comment's gonna go, because we've had lots of discussions about this in operations. The safety monitors.
Mhm.
You know, it's tough. I tried to go through the operations minutes over the last, since 21 and 22. I didn't see the discussions in the minutes, and I'll admit, I was very quickly scanning through them, and I remember that we had a discussion. I brought up some concerns. You were like, oh, well, we're not doing anything now, and then all of a sudden they appeared. And it was never brought to the board to hire them or bring them on, and I know it's not certified staff. It's a lot of money to ask.
Mhm.
It's $250,000. And I should have, and I apologize, it got really busy at work, so I did not get to submit any questions. But my biggest question is, I would love to see any statistics that you have for the 3 years prior to hiring them of the number of unauthorized people you had on school grounds. If you have, I would assume you, or maybe the police department has them.
No, we
There's
don't.
got to be some sort of basis for that in my mind.
No, we don't. We wouldn't keep that kind of statistic. And that's not the only reason for them. That's not the only reason that we chose to put them in place.
So I know.
These positions grew out of conversations that were happening locally and at a statewide a few years ago about armed security in schools. A number of our neighboring communities have moved to armed security. There were several conversations in the recent past where we were talking with the police department about increasing the number of SROs, about the possibility of looking at armed security in our schools, or talking about a hybrid compromise where the police department would be providing armed security that were not necessarily badged police officers. In the course of that conversation, which was inclusive of the police department and therefore the town, we recognized that the town had ARPA dollars, and we thought that a better solution for Guilford would be to increase the number of safety positions without moving all the way to armed security positions. And so in conjunction with moving from 1 to 3 SRO positions, rather than going all the way to 7, rather than looking at non-commissioned police and having them in the buildings, this was an opportunity to put these positions in place. They don't simply intercede with people who are walking into the buildings unannounced, or people who have found a way to skip over the front desk. They're also checking the perimeter of the building. They're in the hallways during passing times. They are outside the building at drop off, at arrival, at recess. So they become essentially extra eyes and ears for the principals. They're communicating back to the principals. They're not part of the disciplinary process. They're not armed, and they're not part of the police presence in the schools. but they are part of an overall layered safety. And so in the same way that we're adding more cameras, in the same way that we're looking at security technology, both around communication and around prevention, it was a way to put a different non-certified position, non-armed position in the building that helps with safety overall. If there is any kind of situation happening at the school, whether it's illness or injury or somebody on property who doesn't belong there, the principal has an additional person that they can go to, particularly at the elementary levels, where there's no redundancy in administration, right? At the elementary level, there's a principal, there's certified teachers, there's a head custodian during the school day. So this allowed for that additional set of eyes and set of ears. They've all at this point been trained by a local FBI agent with look-fors, things to look for in the community, things to identify. They've also been trained by our special education staff in de-escalation techniques.
I want to stop you right there because I saw that in our answers.
Yep.
We had that specific conversation in operations. I brought that up. I
Yep.
said, how are they trained? And I was told that's not their job. That's what the social workers are for. How did that shift occur that now they are getting trained in that? Like, I'm trying to figure
No, I
out
get
how
it.
this is all working, you know?
So when they are in the building or at recess, right? If two second graders begin fighting over a swing, for them to be able to de-escalate that in the moment, in real time, in the space where it's happening would be great. If two second graders have a continual problem with each other, then they're going to hand that off to an administrator or a social worker. But the idea is an additional adult who can help to resolve things at the lowest level immediately before it ever becomes a problem. Now, that same training for our certified staff begins with de-escalation and moves straight into physical assistance or restraint. They were intentionally removed from the room as soon as the training went beyond de-escalation. They are in no way trained or expected or will ever be involved in a restraint or a physical assist or the disciplinary process. That's not their job. But if they can be there in the moment to turn the heat down, then that would be great. We've had two of these positions at the high school, but we've never had them in other settings.
For how long? How long have we had, in theory, it's the same position, right? It's a safety monitor.
It was called hall monitor
Hall
at
monitor.
that time,
But it was
and
two at the high
Aisha, who left us last year, was here as long as I was. So she was here when I got here, and she's been here that whole time. And she became this known presence in the building, moving around. At the upper levels at the high school, and it also is going to involve checking on lavatories as you walk by, right? It is a way to prevent problems. They are not there to respond to problems. And particularly around those recess and lunchroom times, that's a place where a lot of students are together all at once. So we want somebody both making sure that there aren't any unauthorized people walking in all properties, right?
Mhm.
We don't necessarily have people entering the building who don't belong in the building, but we might have somebody walking their dog. We might have somebody who comes to use the tennis court. We have people on property all the time. And this becomes somebody other than the principal who can go out and say, I really need to let you know that the school's in session right now. You need to go walk the dog somewhere else.
I'm just gonna say, and I've said this since the beginning, it's not something I support. I know it's gonna be unpopular. I do think they are very important at the high school and maybe even Adams. It's more of the high volume of turnover, right? Kids coming, going, they get late, they get to leave early. And just that sheer volume, I totally agree that they should be at the high school, possibly Adams. But with all due respect, we've spent millions on our security systems. They have come a long way since my daughter started kindergarten. She's almost finishing high school. It doesn't even look the same. You got the double door entry. There's these great cameras. It's phenomenal. I just think, in this day and age too, I think everybody's more hyper vigilant. I know I am. I saw somebody in my building today that didn't belong in a certain space, and I was not hesitant to be like, you got to go. Like, that's not where you belong. You need to move along. And I know that our teachers and all of our support staff and custodians, everything are all working together. And so I think it's less, I personally think it's less necessary at the elementary schools, given that there's less fluidity within those schools. Have you considered doing something more part-time where it is only at the elementary schools during drop-off and pickup, which is when there's the fluidity, when things could be off kilter, maybe you don't see as much, but not all day, and do a reduction in their cost? Have you guys, is that been a consideration that you guys have thought of?
We haven't. My initial concern is we wouldn't be able to fill those positions, that if we asked somebody to be in 2 hours in the morning and 2 hours in the afternoon, I think we would just end up with vacancies. It does not have to be an all or nothing decision, right? There are 6 of these positions that we're asking to add new to the budget. There are 8 overall. There's certainly, right, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It could be 0, it could be 2, it could be 6, it could be 8, right? There's variability within that.
Yeah, I have a lot of concerns about this and how this has come about and been brought into the school, that it keeps changing, and I'm finding out about this after the fact, and I just have a lot of concerns. And I've made this very clear to you, Dr. Freeman,
we've
since
had
the
this
beginning.
conversation.
And unfortunately, you know, I know it's in response to some very terrible incidents from around the country. Yeah, I think Uvalde was the latest one, which is what brought about the armed guards. But even in those settings, we have seen that security or safety monitors, armed or unarmed, actually don't help at all. So it just seems to me as if there's a lot of money that's looking to be expended on this, that we don't really have the data on, that isn't really supporting putting them in there. I think there's just too many questions. I'm just gonna go on record. I personally cannot support 6 safety monitors within our district for that kind of money.
Further to that is the SRO. So the SRO funds are going up. I think is it going from 2 to 3 or
It's
1?
going from 2 to 3 in the budget that sits before you.
Okay, so correct to assume that each one of those SROs is 30K. Is that how it works out?
40, I believe our contribution is.
We share the expense.
That fills a lot of the, okay, so we are at 90 for 3. That's what the budget calls for.
Is our
correct?
30, is our share 31 then?
No, that's
That's what we
total budget.
budgeted, yes.
Okay, so yeah, I stand corrected. We budgeted 30 per each. We make a contribution to the salaries. The police department covers the bulk of the salary.
So we, I knew we had 2, where are we thinking of putting the third SRO?
So the structure would be, and if we get to fully staffed at 3 SROs, 1 would be at the high school for the full day. 1 would be splitting one of our middle schools and 2 elementaries, and the other would be covering the other middle school and the other 2 elementaries. And then the plan would be that those are not locked in permanent assignments. Those assignments would rotate weekly or bi-weekly, so that all 3 officers got to know all 3 buildings, all 3 staffs, all 3 populations of students. But with 3 people on, instead of 1 person who is supposed to be patrolling 7 buildings, you'd have 1 person at the high school, the largest building, and then 2 people who are each responsible for 3 buildings on that given day.
And prior to this, what we had was 1 person at the high school and one SRO who was at the other 6.
So we currently only have 1 SRO who on paper is patrolling all 3 buildings, but in reality ends up spending most of his time or her time here at the high school. We have budgeted up to 2, but we have yet to fill that position. And when we move to
And we're
3,
adding a third.
and we'll be adding a 3rd next year. Now that'll be a budgeted position. The police department is currently working to hire and train officers, and so the fill will have to catch up with the budget.
How do we feel on that confidence level?
Well,
in
that's what I was
terms
just
of
gonna say,
filling them?
across the state, police departments,
Yes.
fire departments are having.
As
real
much trouble as
difficulty with
teachers are.
recruitment.
My
Yeah.
question, because forgive me, I missed it somehow in this all, the 3rd SR. So the question of then having 9 safety monitors and 3 SROs,
Right.
I'm gonna say sounds like a lot.
8 and 3.
And I would like, I guess, to think about that a little bit. I mean, I was interested to learn and having these answers to our questions are so helpful. And then you described the safety monitor. I think I assumed more of a safety monitor, for potential outside threats. Using them within the building and monitoring kids on the playground and, I mean, I guess I'm wondering how that balances with our recess aides and our lunch aides and the idea of having 3 SROs and 9 safety monitors, eight safety monitors. So it just sounds like a lot.
So again, it is a dual responsibility. Yes, they're there and they're watching the kids, but they're also monitoring that space in the perimeter as well. And I know I've told the story of myself walking up to a recess and being approached by the safety monitor. They're really doing both. And so again, the position was previously called hall monitor. As we increased the number, we also expanded the responsibilities. And so they're not just a hall monitor. They are now a safety monitor responsible for the safe behavior of the students, as well as the safety of the environment. And again, it is very intentionally layered. All of this is the idea of multiple layers. So there is a technology layer that we continue to be growing and investing in. Then there is a professional police layer. And then there is the safety monitor layer, as well as an administrative layer, as well as a teacher layer, as well as when we teach students to be upstanders, not bystanders, and the Sandy Hook promise. All of those are intended to be multiple and multifaceted strands in a net. And yes, there are redundancies built into that. And you could certainly reduce those redundancies by all means, and hopefully not weaken the system by reducing. It's this constant measuring.
Just on the safety monitors, so God willing, nothing ever happens, but they are not equipped. They are not.
No,
Something happens, they're stepping aside. They're not.
they are not security personnel.
So
No.
I guess that's my question is, so they identify a suspicious individual on the campus. They report that to the administrator calls the police department. Is that the protocol?
They interact with the person.
Right, I'm right, obviously they interact, but if they still identify a problem, then what is the step that then happens?
Oh, the same that exists now. It's just one more person who
Yeah.
has a specific responsibility. So yes, so if they saw a stranger in the building, or if they saw something that they thought represented a threat to the school, they would inform the principal immediately. If the SRO was on site, they could inform the SRO immediately. If the SRO was not on site in that moment of time, because even at 3, we won't have full-time coverage, then you would call the police department. So all of those, if it was more immediately threatening, they might trigger a lockdown themselves, and they would make
Are
the
they
decision to
trained for
put the
that?
school in lockdown. Any adult can trigger a lockdown at any time in
Our
any of our
systems are
schools.
included in that training.
Yes, they have received the ALICE training in the same way that the teachers receive the ALICE training every year that talks about when you trigger a lockdown. Yes.
You spoke a lot about kind of what the day in the life of a safety monitor looks like. What does it look like for an SRO? Specifically these 3, if we were able to fill these 3 positions, what does that look like for us?
So the first and most important difference is that the safety monitors work for the school system and report directly to the principal. The police officers in our schools work for the police department, report through the police chief, and are assigned to our schools where they partner with our administrators. They also are not part of our disciplinary process, although at times they may help with an investigation if there is an assumption or a suspicion that the investigation involves the violation of the law. So it could be for possession of contraband, it could be for threatening or violent behavior. Then the SRO would engage in that activity. They are like the safety monitors, with that big difference, both looking inward and outside at the same time. So they're aware of the environment, and they are there to protect our students against threats or dangers. They don't police our students, but they do move around and interact with our students. And to the degree that they can be lighthearted and friendly and de-escalate tense situations by their presence, we encourage that. So if things are getting loud at a lunch table and it sounds like tempers are flaring, that SRO is going to walk over to that lunch table in the same way that an assistant principal would, just to calm things down by the proximity of being there. They are protecting our students, not policing our students, but we want to be building that positive relationship and rapport that every community would hope officers have with it. It is
a very important relationship, and I've seen it firsthand, just how good our SRO is, and there's a value to that.
It is the model of community policing at its best.
But what is it? So we know the SRO here is a full, that SRO is stationed to Guilford High School.
When we get up to 3, it will be.
Okay.
At this moment, it is not expected to be, but by default and necessity, it oftentimes feels that the SRO is here full time unless another principal has to call him away for something that is pressing.
And if we're able to fill these, positions, the way you're explaining it is that there would be a full-time SRO here at the high school.
Yep.
There would then be an SRO that would take Adams and 2 other elementary schools, and an SRO that would take Baldwin and 2 elementary
Yep.
schools, and you'd cycle them so that they all
Yes.
learn to the administrators, they know the administrators.
And the idea there would be that those other 2 who are now in the cycle where they get to patrol would be present at each of those buildings on a daily basis, right? So you might start the morning at your middle school, you'd be there for arrival, you'd be super visible. Once things are settled and students are into that first period block, they're going to run over and hit one of the elementary schools, and then they're going to visit the next one. Even the regular town patrol officers have moved over these last several years into a park walk and talk model, right? So the patrol officers 10 years ago may have driven by a school just to see if everything looked quiet. They now park their car, usually in a really obvious place. They enter the building, they interact with the front office staff, with the principal. They walk the perimeter of the building to make sure the doors are closed. They talk to the kids while they see, and then they move on to their next assignment. So to move up to 3 officers would not change that model, but we'd have more of that model. It is intentionally unpredictable. They're not on a schedule, so you don't know when the officer is going to be at each of those schools. We don't think that there is currently a need in Guilford for 7 full-time police officers. Quite honestly, a full-time badged officer at one of our elementary schools all day long would be bored. But it increases the visibility, it increases that community policing component. And then again, really the safety monitor is a redundancy in that, but it's a redundancy with somebody who is not armed, is not security, but is safety. And without apology, it is meant to be a redundancy. It may not be a redundancy that we believe we can afford as the cost shifts from ARPA dollars to our budget. And that is fair and reasonable and your decision.
And I just want to add too, like the police officers have so much more training, especially in like CRT, crisis response, mental health, and the SRO, and I don't know if everybody knows, there's a juvenile review board in Guilford. They can make referrals to that. So if they catch, if they see someone vaping, and they get in trouble in the high school, they could be referred to this other juvenile review board that can help intervene. I can't say enough great things. Listen, I am against SROs as a general rule based upon what I do for a living. I think that they do some horrible things to some of my clients, and that's mostly in the inner cities. But Officer Gingras is an amazing SRO, and I'm serious that I wish I could clone him because he has a great rapport with our students. He doesn't overstep. He actually helps families in crisis and refers them. I can't say enough great things about him, and I hope that we are able to keep him and he's able to train more of the officers that come through, because it's an amazing program and worth all the money that we put into it.
It's a healthy connection.
We do.
Which is the difference between safety and.
Yeah, it's a healthy.
We do have data
relationship.
around the SROs. So Officer Gingras is our 3rd SRO. We've had an SRO in the system for about 6 years. The danger and the worries with SROs is that if you place an SRO in a school, you see disciplinary referrals go up, you see arrests go up, you see expulsions go up, and you particularly see all of those things increasing. And you see a discrepancy racially and where that's happening. The SRO data nationwide bears all of that out. In Guilford, since we have had an SRO in schools, we have not seen an increase in the suspension rate. We have not seen an increase in the expulsion rate, and we essentially have not had an arrest on school property for as long as anybody can remember. So locally, the things that you would be concerned about with an SRO model have not and are not occurring. And we will continue to watch those data to make sure that we are not having an unintended consequence that by putting an officer in a school to protect us from outsiders, that we are somehow more rigorously or unfairly policing our own students. And that's not what we've done in Guilford. It's never been the model. We've always had an enormously positive relationship with the police department.
And it goes to the model after they leave Guilford. Like, it's a relationship with a law enforcement officer that's positive for whatever their experiences are beyond that. Which, to your point, on a state level, it's a really difficult conversation in a lot of districts, but we're really fortunate. And so we have an incredible model. So I personally would wholeheartedly support the SRO line in this budget, because I think that is the model we have built in this community that is proven not only around safety, but just relationship with kids, that safe, smart person in the building that they can go to.
For one of the best dollar values we
Right.
have in the whole budget.
Yes. So I will go on record as saying, like, I think that this is an investment we've made, and it's proven itself, right? In terms of data, you're saying about data, it's proven itself effective, just anecdotally from the stories we hear from families, but, and, as long as we can staff it, that's going to be the thing, it's sad, but it's hard to staff police departments and fire departments right now, so.
It is worth noting that the SRO model is more expensive. It's just a shared expense with the police department,
Yeah.
right? And so there is a cost to this. It's just only part of
Right,
it
like
shows
we
up in
vote
our
for the
budget.
town
The other
budget.
part shows in the police department
Right,
budget.
it's in
And we
their budget
appreciate
too.
that partnership.
So, yeah.
But that's what makes it even that much more valuable.
Right, because the community is investing on two fronts in this idea,
So we agree the SROs are valuable and we like them because they're working out right so far.
Yeah.
So, but I still have an issue with what do we call them, home monitors?
Safety monitors.
Safety monitors. So the safety monitors, while I do appreciate it, it's part of the layering. I haven't seen any data that we needed them. I haven't heard of incidences where they've been required, like we've never said, oh, I really wish we had 10 more. Oh, I really wish we had more. This happened and it could have been eliminated if we had one more safety monitor. I don't know where they come from. I don't know what company hires them. I don't know how they're trained. I don't know what their skill sets are. I don't know that they're trained in objectivity. I imagine, given the amount of security guards that I've hired in my lifetime, which are many, and managed and have had to terminate, they're very subjective. They're completely biased by their own life that they've lived. And again, they're not trained like police officers are trained. And I have a very difficult time seeing how they're anything more than it's nice to have as long as we get a good one or 6. And given the cost. And now I don't think that the responsibility of deciding the safety of our children should be on the board. We didn't add them to the board. We didn't approve them in past budgets. And I don't appreciate that we're now having to decide as a board whether or not we should have safety monitors, because hopefully nothing happens. But if something does happen, I certainly don't want to be the guy who voted and recommended eliminating safety monitors. So I will say that I don't appreciate the way that this came about without consulting the board, without talking to us, using ARPA money and then rolling it into the budget. It really, I know it wasn't on purpose. I know that, obviously. But at the same time, now the responsibility is on us to say, there's $300,000, $250,000 worth of safety monitors that we never saw the need, we weren't consulted on, and now we're having to decide between whether or not we add a teacher at Cox and safety monitors, well, frankly, I don't care if someone's walking the dog on the property. I don't need to pay $250,000 a year at the sacrifice of actual education costs that we could be spending on kids' education. It's honestly, I think it's a raw deal, and I'm disappointed that we have to deal with this right now.
Well, I appreciate that position and I own that. That
And
was
again,
my-
I know you didn't.
No, that was my decision and I did it based on conversations that were happening statewide about whether we are moving towards putting armed security guards in the building. So I appreciate that. I own that and I acknowledge that I have placed the board in that position as we now weigh whether we keep these positions moving
But there's
forward.
another side to that.
Sit back, son.
If these did not get put in around the concept of safety, when we were all aware about the national stuff. And something happened, we would beat the superintendent up for saying, how come you aren't thinking forward? So what Paul did
Mhm.
was he thought forward, exactly what we want, and it is our responsibility. We don't have to like it. And we may decide that it's not a priority now, but I'd rather be able to say that now than not have that choice.
Yeah.
I think the forward-looking notion of let's always be even over concerned about safety is better than being under concerned. So in that sense, I think it was the right thing to do. It may not be the right thing to do in our funding of it. It was a luxury last year because we didn't have to pay for it. But the concept makes sense. So now we have to decide, but I'd rather decide 9 of us than one person.
And Dick, if I could just, I respectfully disagree with that only because we don't know the training, the experience, the things of that nature, which we do have with with the SROs.
Oh.
And that's, I just want to draw a big distinction.
I'm not
between the two.
arguing for one or the other. My point was, I think it was I was disagreeing.
With us,
I was disagreeing with Noel,
yeah.
who essentially was making the case that it shouldn't be brought up. This is not our problem. And I'm saying, well, Paul says he brought it up. That's what he's supposed to do. And he's supposed to put us in that position. And I'm happy to make the decision. We may decide not to do it for the reasons you're suggesting. But I think it was the right thing to do, to raise the issue. And it's now raised. It wasn't a budget issue last year. And it was a joint decision between the town and the administration. We had the luxury last year to make that decision. And the question is it a luxury? Is it a luxury too much that this year we don't think we need it? That's all. And that's a fair decision.
We've talked enrollment, we've talked athletics, we've talked safety monitors. Are there other topics that we want to address or questions we want to ask before?
I think I have one that'll be a healthy conversation. Substitutes. With a significant increase in substitutes.
I actually had that on my list, not because we haven't heard so much about the strain. It's just a big amount. So
Yes.
trying to understand, well, no, I should let you ask the
No,
question. Sorry, I was just,
It is a significant number, and is all of that head count? Like, I guess, we're throwing a lot of money at what seemingly is a big problem, right? We're consistently seeing this more and more. Does this even solve the problem? Or are we able to even fill these seats if money is not an object? I'm just trying to figure out where this money is going to be allocated to
So
and what purpose.
there's a news story out this weekend about Greenwich having exactly the same conversation. Superintendent in Greenwich was really articulate about the need for substitutes in Greenwich. You could have changed it to Guilford. So costs for substitutes are going up in all ways. We have been increasing the pay to substitutes to try to better fill the positions. At the same time, we have increasing need for substitutes. So with the teacher shortage, we're seeing new hires. We're hiring at a higher rate. We're sometimes hiring younger staff, and we are having a constant need for long-term substitutes. We're having a hard time filling long-term substitutes. Long-term subs used to come in at a scale. For the first 40 days, you were paid the regular daily rate. It wasn't until after 40 days that you were bumped up to a more professional rate. We're not getting people with that offer anymore. When we know that we've got a long-term position, we are forced to pay the professional rate from day one, or we're not going to have people coming in and filling those positions. We've increased the rate for building subs, and we've held building subs to the pandemic level. We haven't retreated back to the pre-pandemic level. Underlaying all of that, we are seeing the absentee rate for teachers increasing. So teachers are taking more time out. They're taking time that they have contractually available to them. And the thing becomes a self-feeding system because we're having a hard time filling substitutes and covering classes. Teachers are stepping up and covering for each other, which is wearing teachers down, and you're seeing teachers take more time out of the building themselves. With COVID still out there and the seasonal flu out there and RSV out there, we're just seeing, so we've got more days that we need to cover. We are competing for subs, so we're raising the rate to cover those people. This is simply a calculation of usage and the new rates and trying to be competitive in filling those positions. And no, we're not filling all those positions right now. Principals are hearing from teachers, and we're constantly hearing from principals that we're not getting them all the subs they need. So we're struggling to be creative. All of you would have received a mailing that went out from Lori Hahn recently to the community, explaining all the different kinds of subs that we need and asking people to step up. Jason has been getting a flyer out to graduate schools locally because we think graduate students often have Fridays off, and would they be willing to sub 1 or 2 days a week to, especially on Fridays, where it's the hardest day. Not only do we have higher teacher absenteeism on Fridays, but we get a worse response from subs who want to take a day to work on Friday. So it is a confluence of events, and we're raising it. I don't know if we're raising it enough, and we're doing the best we can to fill the gaps.
I'm sorry, I'm like so anxious to ask this question, but like, back in the day, many moons ago, when I was in college, I would get home in May and I would substitute teach at my old
Yes.
high school. It's a great gig, and it was, you know, for the level I was at in my education, it was a great little job to get me into the summer, but our requirements around substitutes require a bachelor's degree, correct?
Correct.
Is
Don't
there
we have
any
introduction to college
flexibility?
students?
Wasn't there talk about
What about
changing
an
that?
education student, like someone who's
Yeah.
studying
Have to have
education
a
undergrad?
They have to have a bachelor's.
They have to have a bachelor's, that's required by the state or
Yes.
just by, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's not a local requirement. But again, that's why we think grad students could be an interesting place to go.
Well, I'm just thinking students, like, but it's unfortunate that like a third year undergrad education major couldn't step in and help an elementary class for a day. No, yeah. Because they're probably the ones to be most eager for that opportunity.
I know. I just want to point out that the actual expenditures for substitutes for the 22-23 school year was $443,253. So a budget request of $450,000 is going to cover our actuals from a year ago.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
You're talking about actuals, yeah,
Actual
not what we
spend
budgeted.
for 22-23.
Right. So you're right sizing the ship.
Yeah, we're just trying to get the number to reflect the need.
$143,253.
Okay, okay.
I gave a much longer answer than
Really?
I had a lot more color. I had a lot more color and nuance and narrative.
It just sits there and lets it run.
So
If I might
it's,
say
again,
so.
it's like the safety monitor, I mean, the SROs, it's like, we're creating this opportunity, but filling that position is just as challenging.
Yeah, and right, and the budget conversation has to happen first, because we need the ability to be able to go out after those positions. And then we have to get creative about being able to go and get those positions. But, you know, the first step is to have the resources available so that we can go after them. And quite honestly, with a little bit of contingency, so there's some room for creativity in going after filling those positions. It's why I'm so nervous about offering up a retirement savings next week, because I think that would be self-defeating at this moment in time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Can I, do you just do,
A current bachelor's degree
Uh-huh.
who only has classes on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, we want to make yourself available and come and sub for us. And it's a quick $120. What is it?
And we're not sure that law students are both.
Wait, what did
We put up a flyer at Quinnipiac Law. There's one
Well,
there as well.
I'm gonna say this, I'm judging a mock trial competition for the law schools, I think in 2 weeks. I know UConn's gonna be there, I know Quinnipiac's gonna be there, I will be hitting them up and giving out my card and saying,
I'll send you the flyer.
yes, please do.
Right.
I'm gonna be walking around and talking.
Principals are writing in their newsletters about substitutes and recess monitors and lunch aides. They're reaching out. Again, it's worth noting, this budget shows no increase in administrative staffing. It shows no increase in instructional coaching. It shows a net increase of 5.7 administrative teaching positions. But as it stands right now, it shows an increase of 13 non-certified positions. And you've heard the principals talking about the importance of having the non-certified positions so that we insulate the teachers and the principals to do their work. It is frustrating to know that we have principals covering classes,
Yeah.
particularly at the
No,
elementary
right,
level.
right.
They are not doing the work that we hired them for. They are the most expensive substitutes you're ever going to find, but when nobody else is there, they're stepping up and they're covering those classes for us.
I think the important thing to remember, Administrator, about the bachelor's degree piece, it's not so much the degree as it is the age. And I think that
I get that.
we need to be mindful of the differential between a high school senior and a,
I had a teacher
Undergrad.
chase me down the hall. True story. My a nun teacher, my sister Ellen.
This is a while ago, by the way.
Chased me down the hall and said, Miss Mead, get back to class. I was a junior in college. So because I looked like a high schooler. So I get your point. I'm just trying to think outside,
Creative,
Yes.
yeah, just maybe education majors, have to be I don't know. It just seems like this is a problem that's not gonna get solved right away. And with the parameters that we have, if we could change those parameters, it might help.
Retired community members watching this on YouTube need to sign up to be substitute teachers. in our
Yeah.
schools.
Yeah,
we are working with the area schools of education though, and, with internships and so forth to help. In that realm, I think to Dr. Freeman's point, we're just up against a competitive pool of surrounding towns that every time one school district makes a move that is innovative, somebody else comes out with something equally as innovative, and it's just a limited pool right now. But believe me, we're doing everything we can.
no, I know.
Any other topics of budget conversation that folks want to raise? I know we will receive answers to a few more questions soon. That is not because people aren't feverishly trying to get to them. And again, I want to Linda, thank you, and Dr. Freeman, thank you for the speed with which you're responding to a multitude of questions. Very much appreciated.
And would the board like me to come with some suggested considerations for reductions for the next meeting?
Yes.
I think that would be great because,
I don't believe I need to do suggested additions. I think that we've got that covered.
yeah, and again, it's just very helpful for us because, I'll speak for myself. I can look through and say, oh, I wonder if we can cut there, I wonder if, but you all have the knowledge behind. And we've asked lots and lots of questions so that we're sharing this knowledge, but hearing that from you, if we're considering reductions.
And they'll have dollar amounts associated with them.
Okay.
And I know that you just said this, but we also very much appreciate the written responses. So we'll finish the ones that we weren't able to respond to for tonight. And if any additional ones come in, we'll keep processing those through the week.
Okay, that's terrific. All right.
We're all
3 hours.
glad we did it at 6.
Yes, no, absolutely.
Great.
In 10:30.
That's
I feel
right.
like we skipped it.
Yeah, no, I think we covered, based on, the questions that came in, et cetera, I think we covered the major topics. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you for those of us, those of you who joined us tonight in person and on camera. Again, we will next meet as a board to discuss the budget next Monday, February 5th.
With a possible decision, but in past years, at times, we've had to push that as well.
That's right. Thank you so much. Good evening.